Darkcast Network. Indie pods with a dark side.
Well, hello there. I'm Regina King, the evil queen.
And I'm Lynn Roskamp, the docent of darkness, and we're the hosts of Disturbing Interests.
Do you get excited about mummies, decorate in skulls, obsess over the loss of the Library of Alexandria, even though it was lost in a different age?
Do you kill the conversation with your in-depth serial killer knowledge, facts about items made out of human skin, or have a strange longing to know the softer side of Mothman?
Have you spent an objectively disproportionate amount of time studying the life of H.H. Holmes?
Oh, I wouldn't know anybody like that. No, certainly not.
Well, I mean, we did call our podcast Disturbing Interests for a reason.
That's right, we've got them, and we are doing you the favor of keeping the questions like, at what temperature does it take to destroy a cadaver out of your browsing history?
Well, we hope.
Because with us, you might be disturbed.
But you're not alone. You can find us on any podcasting platform under Disturbing Interest, or check us out online at disturbinginterest.com.
Devil is on his way. Devil is on his way. Devil is on his way, motherfucker. The devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way. Fall to your knees. Devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way.
Mountain Murders is an Appalachian true crime podcast. Some content may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey y'all,
say
welcome
fuck
back
a
to
lot.
Mountain Murders. I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
We apologize
Oh my
for
God.
being late with this episode. Sickness has taken over our household.
And not the good kind.
Was there what kind of sick, like a sick beat?
Yeah, sick beats.
Like-
The one Taylor warned us about.
No sick beats up in this house, just some funky weird illness.
Sick meats.
I see little animated like germs floating around your head right now, Dylan.
Oh my gosh. I never get sick.
I'm anointing you with a crown of used Kleenexes.
I never get sick, but when I do,
You're the biggest baby.
I'm a big baby, and I get really sick hard though.
But I've
It's
been
hard.
battling this illness for over 2 weeks, and you had it for like a day, and you've been the biggest baby.
Well, I gotta say, I still think I got it. So let's say a day and a half.
I'm just saying, though.
Oh my gosh.
Never seen someone so whiny.
Well, I got, anywho. So here we are. We're a little bit late,
We're powering through today.
but we have to get in there.
So forgive us if we're not on top of our game. We are both battling whatever this crud is. I had 2 negative COVID tests, so I don't think it's COVID.
Super crud.
It's a super crud.
It sucks.
It's true.
And we hope everyone out there is not getting this crud.
Dylan, we have 2 patrons to shout out.
Oh my gosh.
On this episode. Thank you to Vicky and Robin
Thank you, Vicky and Robin.
for donating so generously to patreon.com/Mountain Murders Podcast, where you can become a supporter. You're supporting the show. You're also accessing ad-free content, bonus episodes,
A ton of it.
lots of stuff. Yeah, you want to definitely go check that out. Dylan, we don't have any time to dilly-dally. Are you ready to get into today's episode?
I am so ready.
This is a case I am very familiar with, but I have to say, Dylan, through my research, I have learned a great deal.
And that's what happens when you take a deep dive.
And
Right.
I've taken a deep dive. I'm telling you, I've probably read 4 or 5 books
Right.
in the last week to research for this case. So I've been really on it.
And so you think you were truly surprised how much new stuff you learned.
Well, there's just a lot I didn't know. Okay, so let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. You have on your spiked collar.
Yeah.
You got a little faux hawk going on. I've got my former mohawk sort of spiked up in a little faux hawk.
I need some black eyeliner.
You
too.
do. Yeah. You need like a tight fitted pair of black jeans.
No.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to see me.
Like a midriff top.
Nobody wants to see that.
I want to see it.
Oh, baby.
I'm into it. I'm here for it. Nancy Spungen never played an instrument. She was never in a band. Yet this deeply disturbed woman who lived life on the edge as a drug addict, part-time sex worker, and groupie has become an icon in the mythos of punk rock. And let's just generalize rock and roll music.
Right.
Maybe Nancy was always destined to be the girl with the band. Phil Marcade recalled Nancy as, quote, a punk Cinderella who never got invited to the ball, who ended up with the prince.
Oh, wow.
Now, Dylan, when I say Nancy Spungen, do you know who she is? Are you familiar with Nancy?
Well, this is one of those things that it almost bleeds into pop culture, even if you have no idea about punk. You have you're not a real fan of the Sex Pistols, but you probably have heard of Sid and Nancy, right?
I would hope so.
Right. So, but no, I had no, just a general knowledge.
Well, I'm going to tell you all about Nancy. We're going to talk about the Sex Pistols, the punk music scene. I got a lot to educate you on.
I've been waiting for a podcast about Sid and Nancy.
Have you?
Yeah.
I don't believe it.
I'm so lucky.
Nancy Laura Spungen was born at 6:52 a.m. on February 27th of 1958 to parents Frank and Deborah Spungen. Deborah was a 20-year-old senior at the University of Philadelphia, the only pregnant student on campus.
Wow, that makes her special.
Well, can you imagine in the late 50s being a pregnant college student? Even if you were married, I'm sure you would get some looks.
Oh, yeah.
This was not conventional.
Well, no, society in general was much more conservative back then.
Well, yeah, and most women who were married and expectant mothers should be at home in the kitchen, right?
Barefoot.
Right, not at school pursuing a degree.
Learning how to read and trying to drive cars? What are we doing here, folks?
Frank was in the Army, actually the Army Reserves, and he was stationed at Fort Knox in Kentucky. He had graduated from Penn earlier and had landed an accounting job in New York City after the Army. The newly married Spungens had no plans to have children right away. They thought maybe in 5-6 years, once they had settled into careers.
Yeah, I think that's the way you're supposed to do it. Like, plan it out, meet in college, both of you line up your careers.
I mean, I've heard of that, but I don't really know anyone who's ever actually planned out their children.
It's like a unicorn. You know they're supposedly out there, but you've never seen one.
No, most kids are just, like Bob Ross says, happy little accidents.
There's some listeners out there like, you guys are losers and all your friends are too.
Well,
hey, they were happy little accidents, okay?
I mean, I have a lot of friends who've planned to never have children and they've stuck to that. But most of my friends who have kids, it was a surprise.
That's how sex works. I don't know what to say.
Deborah had studied foreign languages with plans to work in foreign trade in New York City. She wanted to be a career woman alongside her husband, which in 1958, that's a little unconventional, like being pregnant college student.
Now, when would the first wave of feminism come sweeping through our nation? Would it be around this time, maybe?
The Feminine Mystique, which was Betty Friedkin's book, was published in 1963.
Okay, so
and
we're right.
that is really kind of when the feminist movement took off.
Okay, so maybe she's kind of like, hey,
but we didn't really start seeing like feminism, women marching and burning their bras probably to like the late 60s.
I'm against bras as well.
Me too. Fuck a bra. I say burn those bitches. In 1958, there were fewer options for women who became pregnant. Nancy was like a lot of children, unplanned. Frank and Deb realized they had to make do with the situation. They had to shift plans and just kind of roll with the punches, go with the changes. So instead of moving to New York City, which had been Deb's dream, she moved back in with her mother during the pregnancy as Frank was out of state. Deb's mother wasn't pleased with the pregnancy, feeling her daughter was too young to become a mother. When Nancy was born, she had a cord wrapped around her neck and was nearly blue from oxygen deprivation.
Wow.
This is very scary. My daughter was born with the cord And her heart rate kept dropping. It was serious. And when she came out, she was a faint blue color. We were
Wow.
very nervous.
Scary.
Yeah, it's really scary, but I don't think it's like the most uncommon thing to happen. Not only did Nancy have a rough birth, but the baby was jaundiced and had high bilirubin levels at 22 milligrams. Now, I'm no doctor, but that sounds like probably not the best thing.
Yeah, you got to keep your bilirubins down.
You do.
Yeah.
And you don't want your baby to go from blue to yellow,
No.
even though I think those are complementary colors on the color wheel. The doctors at the time required the infant to undergo blood transfusions, and it was a scary time for the new parents. When Nancy was finally released from the hospital, the situation didn't immediately improve. Baby Nancy rarely slept and screamed constantly.
And that makes it really tough on not only the baby, but the new parents.
Well, after making numerous inquiries as to her child's condition, Deb was given phenobarbital to administer to the infant. This is a very strong sedative.
I was going to say, isn't that a very, very strong narcotic?
Yeah, I know it's a sedative. Like, I think it'll knock you the fuck out, Dylan. The medication helped baby Nancy sleep for only 1 to 2 hour stretches. But in between, when she wasn't sleeping, she was just screaming her head off. Like, nonstop all the time.
And that's a very tough situation.
Yeah. Her mother was getting little sleep as well. Very stressful situation. She knew her daughter's behavior wasn't normal, but hoped she would grow out of it. By her first birthday, Nancy was a bright toddler. She had a 12-word vocabulary, but due to the neurological problems at birth, she had to wear leg splints as a baby. Deb continued noting her daughter's extreme energy. She described Nancy as, quote, crawling around like a demon.
Wow.
And would bounce off the walls with hyperactivity. When Deb would try to hold Nancy, she would stiffen like a board. The baby did not like affection, hugs, cuddles. Now that's different, right?
Yeah, most little babies don't mind to be cuddled up, you know?
Her eyes were crossed, and Nancy had trouble keeping her tongue in her mouth. Doctors didn't seem to be bothered by the child's peculiar habits. Deb wanted to get a master's degree after Nancy was born, and she thought maybe she could leave the child with her mother for a few hours a day while she went to class. But Nancy was hysterical and made her grandmother very nervous. She just screamed the whole time and threw fits.
Well, I mean, it's always tough for the grandparent to, watch after a child because they're rambunctious, they're full of energy. And it sounds like Nancy has a very particular set of skills that would make it tough for a grandparent to watch after them.
She was angry, aggressive, and screamed all day long. Like, there was never a moment's peace in this house.
Well, I think when at first when you said her mother referred to her as a little demon crawling around, that sounds like maybe an apt description at this point.
Yeah, I mean, at first I was kind of like, damn, Deborah.
Yeah. Well, sure, she comes through there with her little tongue hanging out of her mouth, all pissy.
But it
doesn't want you to touch her.
We're going to talk a lot about Nancy's life because I think it's important to set the stage for what happens, how we end up with the legend of Nancy Spungen. So I think it's really important to discuss her early years, her childhood, what was going on with her. So we're going to do a lot of talking about Nancy.
And I'm kidding around. I'm sure that a lot of these behaviors trace back to the issues that the poor little baby's dealing with. So
Deb and Frank could see their daughter demanded nearly every waking second of their time. She needed constant attention, and they described her as occupying all extremes.
Gosh, I just imagine being a new parent and my first child. I've said it before. Long-time listeners have heard me say it more than once. My first child had colic. Rather severe case of it, and he just cried all the time. His little tummy's always hurting him, gas buildups and stuff, and we had to do some creative things to just get him to quieten down for even an hour. I mean, we had to do things like run the vacuum, record the vacuum running because we couldn't afford to let the vacuum just sit there and run like we had been doing, drive him around. Hopefully he falls out in the car and you get an hour or so. So it can be very, very nerve-wracking, especially for new parents.
Yes. When Nancy was 19 months old, Deb gave birth to another child. And guess what, Dylan? This one was also not planned. A girl named Susan. They called her Susie for short. Nancy instantly did not like the new baby. When the family tried moving into a different house, Nancy threw a fit. She unpacked the moving boxes and even attacked the phone man when he came to disconnect their phone line.
Oh my gosh.
And she's like not even
toddler.
2 years old.
She's like jumping off shelves on his neck and stuff.
Yes. Like her mother had to pry her, like rip her from this man's legs as she's like beating him and attacking him.
So this leads me to believe maybe Nancy's not at this age comfortable with change, maybe.
Sounds like it. From the start in the new neighborhood, Nancy didn't get along with the other kids. She refused to potty train, and she seemed to alienate herself from other children. No one wanted to play with her. One day, she decided she was going to wear big girl pants, and that was it. She just put on the underwear and had no accidents, and from then on, she was good.
Okay.
So it just goes to show, when she set her mind to something, she could make it happen.
Right. And do a very good job at it.
Yeah, I mean, she never had an accident and suddenly had just potty trained herself in a single day. Nancy had eruptive fits multiple times a day. These could be triggered by clothing, just getting dressed, food she was eating. The child would throw violent tantrums, sometimes hyperventilating until she passed out. Deborah and Frank felt something was incredibly wrong and sought medical help for their daughter. Now, again, Nancy's a toddler. She's still not sleeping. She had horrific nightmares and would wake up as many as 7 to 8 times each night. But doctors assured the Spungens nothing was wrong with Nancy, that she's fine, normal even, that this is not unusual child behavior. When her little sister Susie began walking, Nancy would push her down repeatedly. I'm just looking at your face. It's like, what?
Well, I mean, I feel bad for the poor little baby Nancy, and Susie's just, she doesn't even know why she's catching all this hell. But I'm surprised. I'm not surprised, but it's strange that the doctors would just be like, oh yeah, it's just normal behavior. But I mean, I felt like I've gotten that attitude from doctors before. It's like they don't ever listen to the opinion of the layman. They always know best. You know what I mean?
And I think maybe they get the idea that parents are exaggerating, or maybe we're too worried, or making a bigger deal out of something that might be a small issue.
I'm sorry that nothing about Nancy's behavior as a toddler sounds normal to me.
No, I don't think Dr. Spock wrote about this in
attacking the phone man when he tries to
books.
move your phone line.
This definitely is not in What to Expect When You're Expecting.
No.
So though her mother was concerned by this behavior, Frank didn't want their child seeing more doctors. Plus, they really couldn't afford it. He's the only one working. They have these 2 small children. In October of 1961, Nancy's baby brother David was born, and she seemed to fall in love with the little boy. Nancy had a stuttering problem as well as the behavioral issues, so she was taken in for a psychiatric evaluation. At 3 years old, she had an IQ of 134 and was communicating and reading at a 7-year-old's level.
Holy cow.
Doctors said Nancy had motor visual deficiency, which was causing her these problems, and that preschool might help. Doctors felt that Nancy was highly intelligent, but her lack of motor skills was causing her to be frustrated and act out. Like her body wasn't like matching up with her brain's capability.
Her body wasn't able to achieve all the things her brain wanted to accomplish.
That is what the doctor said, yes.
And that would make sense. And that would make sense why it's almost a continuous issue, because every day her brain is operating at a very high level, but then her body's not able to keep up.
When Nancy started school, finally, she was moved into academically gifted classes. But she had trouble making friends. She ended up skipping 3rd grade to 4th grade, but she was able to keep up scholastically. The problem was, teachers complained about her behavior. Nancy would laugh hysterically at her own jokes. She was disruptive in class. She had social problems with other students, couldn't make or maintain friends. In the instance that Nancy did make friends with a girl, they would be besties for like a week tops, then have some massive falling out and become bitter enemies.
Now, there's a fine line at how much you can laugh at your own jokes. There really is, before people notice and think, wow, what's wrong with them? Don't you think?
I don't know. I laugh at my own jokes all the time. Of course, I'm usually alone.
Well, yeah.
And then I'll be like, oh my God, Heather, you're so hilarious. And then I'm like, ha ha. And then I sadly look around and I'm like, I'm by myself. By now, Nancy was manipulative. She was controlling and bullying her younger siblings with ferociousness. Nancy's favorite activity was to exclude Susie from whatever she and David were doing. Now, they say two's company, three's a crowd, Dylan. You had 3 kids.
Yes.
Right? Did you find this was an issue, that they would exclude each other, leave one out?
I never noticed that too much. Of course, they were all 3 years apart from each other, so basically, so they didn't really. They were kind of removed from doing activities together. Does that make sense?
Right.
They were a little bit ahead of each other, so there wasn't a whole lot of.
Because I was an only child, but I had cousins that I grew up with that were not far off in age, and I do remember this being a thing.
Really?
Where my one cousin, we would play, but she'd be like, well, we're going to leave her out.
Yeah.
And then they would like gang up and not want to play with me.
Okay.
Right? So it just makes me wonder if it's a girl thing or if this is just what happens when you get groups of 3 together.
I think this is what happens when you get humans together. Somebody's got to lose.
Well, yeah, but I do see kind of more of this behavior, I think, among girl groups. Because I remember this being a thing in elementary school. You'd go in, at least I would, and the girls I would hang out with, there was a group of 5 or 6 girls who were friends, and they would just like each week choose who they were going to alienate that day.
What's wrong with kids?
And be like, we're not going to be your friend today.
Yeah.
And I would be devastated, but then I'd come back the next day and they were like,
You're
nothing
included.
had ever happened.
Yeah.
I mean, it was so fucking weird.
But now we're ostracizing someone else.
Mean girls. Anyway, the tantrums continued. The entire family had to adapt and adjust to Nancy's moods and whims. It was Nancy's way or everyone suffered. When her parents tried to stand their ground, they'd eventually cave because there was no peace until Nancy got her way. She was relentless.
That's like the Beastie Boys.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
No peace?
No peace in Brooklyn.
The whole house was impacted. Nancy screamed, kicked, she would call people names. It was unpleasant for everybody. Punishments made it worse. If Nancy was upset, you could just kiss your ass goodbye. And if for whatever reason, like her dad popped her, it was on, like Donkey Kong. Like if the viciousness, the violence, the tantrum had been bad before,
right?
She went like, it went up to it went all the way up to 11 if she got physically punished.
Gosh, I would. This would be a bad scenario for me because I'm one to draw a line with children, and once you cross that line, then you're going to have consequences.
It didn't matter with this child.
I know.
Her parents, it's like they had no recourse. And when they would talk to doctors and say, if we try to stand our ground, it doesn't work, they would just, kind of be dismissed, or it was just a dead end. No one could help, it seemed, with Nancy's problems. And of course, the behavioral problems started taking their toll on the Spungens' marriage. Frank had taken a job in Philadelphia, but was offered to work 2 days a week in New York City with his company. While in the city, Frank would go to nice dinners and see shows. Of course, his wife, Deb, was resentful because she's stuck at home raising 3 children, one with severe and profound issues. She never gets a break.
Yeah.
She's on 24/7, while her husband is out living it up child-free in the city.
And you can't blame her if that was how she was feeling because, I mean, come on. Frank's over there chilling in the city, hanging out with adults, doing a bunch of cool stuff.
Right, in the city she had always dreamed of living in.
Yeah.
Going to Broadway shows, going to the symphony, like watching concerts, and this is like the life she wanted to live, right? Deb discovered Frank would lie about being in the office. Like he would say he was in the New York office, and she would call and find out that no, he was actually not like in the office that day, or no, he's back in Philadelphia, but he wouldn't even call to say he had come home yet.
Oh my gosh.
It's like he preferred to be anywhere but home. And Deb understands because at this point, she's kind of like pulling her hair out. She doesn't want to be home either, right? Nancy just created this intolerable atmosphere for everybody. Yet doctors continued stating that she was perfectly normal and that there was nothing off about her behavior. Nancy's behavior was taking its toll on her parents, marriage, her siblings,
everyone
having
in her
to adjust.
orbit.
Deb began having an affair, but her husband didn't seem to notice or care. Eventually, she confessed, and they had a discussion regarding the breakdown of their relationship and took a serious look at divorce. Though they loved their daughter, the couple finally had to admit some hard truths. Nancy was at the core of their unhappiness.
Well, it's because everything's centered around Nancy. And I'm sure it sounds like even if the situation's not centering around Nancy, it could very quickly, Nancy would make it center around her.
The family moved to Huntingdon Valley, which is outside of Philadelphia. It's an affluent suburb where they hoped the schools might be better suited at handling Nancy. They bought a 2-story colonial home on Red Barn Lane, and they thought this brought the promise of a new day for their family. Now, at first, Nancy did well. She made some friends and found an interest, music. Nancy loved the rock musical Hair. She had the album, played it on repeat. She even got a cat, which she named Aquarius. Nancy found rock music, or rock music found Nancy. Either way, it was like a match made in heaven. She jammed to the Beatles, Joan Baez, The Doors, Jimi Hendrix, The Rolling Stones, Jefferson Airplane, Janis Joplin, Led Zeppelin, like all the big bands at the time.
Could you imagine that's just what's on the radio? That's just regular music back then, all those people you just named.
I know, I'm envious.
Golly, Bob, that was one of the best.
What a time to be alive.
What a time to be a music lover.
Person.
And you just flip the radio in your mom's station wagon, wood-paneled station wagon on, and you got Jim Morrison or Zeppelin or The Doors, or you hear Jimi Hendrix for the first time. I'm jelly, too.
I am, too, bro. She became obsessed with reading counterculture books and magazines like The Rolling Stone. A voracious reader, Nancy consumed Sylvia Plath, Kurt Vonnegut, J.D. Salinger, Ken Kesey, and others. But it didn't take long for the new girls at school to turn on Nancy. Deb thought allowing Susie and Nancy to share a bedroom might bring them closer, and that Nancy could maybe find a friend in her sister since she was having so much trouble making friends at school. But it was a nightmare. Nancy terrorized her little sister, even destroying her sister's side of the room after a heated argument.
Man, damn. Come on now.
11. Now, just remember, she's still a child here. She's only 11. 11-year-old Nancy tried harming the cat, too. That's when her parents took her to a psychiatrist once more for help. She was tested again. It was shown that Nancy had an IQ of 135 and was reading at a college level. The doctor determined that Nancy viewed interpersonal interactions negatively. She was dependent, but those feelings were met with anger because she didn't want to be dependent on people, but she knew she had to be. And it would create this
it would piss her
fury
off,
in her.
this frustration because she's having these feelings and she doesn't want them or is not processing them in the appropriate way. Therefore, it would make her mad.
The doctor described her as being emotionally hungry and that she had poor impulse control, especially when it came to her emotions, like anger. The doctor ultimately blamed Nancy's home life for the problems. The Spungens were told in order to fix their daughter, they had to fix themselves. So at the end of the day, they were responsible for their daughter's issues.
Okay.
You know, and of course, Nancy's parents are really frustrated. They're like, we've tried everything. We've tried to get help. We've done everything we can think of as parents.
We've been trying since she was a little baby, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, how many doctor's visits? How many tests? How many requests for guidance or, asking for some kind of help with her, and they just keep getting blown off by these doctors.
The doctor prescribed a medication called Atarax, which is an antihistamine, but can also help with anxiety. After taking this medication, Nancy had a severe reaction, which resulted in a psychotic episode. The medication was not an option. Like, this episode was really bad. She had like a break from reality. Yeah, it was not good. Nancy's family began to recognize a look that she would get just before having a meltdown, and they called it the look.
Oh my gosh.
So they knew when one was coming.
Right.
Her parents didn't know if Nancy was just a brat or if there was a deeper problem. And that's what they're trying to find out, but they just can't get to the bottom of this. Nancy's fits of rage would end with her pulling her hair out by the roots. She would have handfuls of hair.
So would that type of behavior disturb you if one of your children at any age was doing this?
I would be very frightened. I would be very concerned for my child.
a
this
double handful of your own hair.
rage that is
Yes.
in my child, and then that has to hurt, physically pulling your hair out by its roots
Oh my gosh.
and having chunks of hair.
Yeah,
I mean, yes, this is very disturbing on so many levels,
I agree.
especially as a parent because you feel helpless.
Well, yeah.
You naturally want to fix the problem for your children.
Well, it's like they've tried everything they could ever imagine to try. So what do you do? Where do you go from here?
Well, daily life was just a total misery for everybody. She would cuss her parents, siblings, teachers, other kids. She was cruel and verbally abusive. She would call her father a shithead and dare her mother to divorce him.
Okay.
On a trip to New York City with the family, Nancy learned there was a live rock concert happening in Central Park. It was her favorite musical, Hair. So there was some band there playing all the songs from Hair.
Oh, wow.
Of course, she wanted to go, but her parents told her they wouldn't have time to attend the free concert. Nancy ran away. She's 11, Dylan.
She ran away in New York City to go to a free concert in the park.
Yes.
Oh, my gosh.
Frantic, her parents are looking everywhere. They had to call the police. Finally, an announcement was made over the concert's speaker system for Nancy that her parents were looking for her.
Come to the front. Your parents are ready.
When she was found, Nancy was in a daze. The car ride home, she acted as if she didn't know what had happened. Like she was just completely checked out.
Wow.
And her parents were obviously very concerned. Nancy would tell her father that Deb had abused her. She would tell strangers that Frank was beating her. Just lie to people. During arguments, she would throw food across the room. It was like total chaos followed Nancy. And then she started running away from home. One weekend when her parents decided to go out of town, which they were very cautious about leaving, but they hired a babysitter and asked Deb's mother, Nancy's grandmother, to come over. So there were 2 adults in the house for this weekend.
So they could back each other up.
Nancy climbed to the family's roof, yelling, "I want to die," repeatedly. And of course, this caused a stir in the neighborhood. They live in the suburbs. They live in a very residential area. All the neighbors are out mowing their lawns and whatever. And this girl's up on the roof screaming she wants to die, causing a major scene. During the episode, once Nancy came in the house, she grabbed a pair of scissors and told the sitter, "I'm going to stab you to death, you fucking bitch."
Oh, see, no. Not many people are going to react very well to that. It's going to be, most people's going to find it very disturbing.
When her parents told the psychiatrist about the incident, the doctor said Nancy was acting out and wouldn't actually stab anyone. The Spungens were deeply disturbed, yet this doctor was dismissive.
Once again.
As Nancy's behavior deteriorated, she gained weight and always seemed to have this glazed over expression. After months of telling the psychiatrist about Nancy's outbursts, she finally had a blow up in the doctor's office. And so for the first time, the doctor seemed to get a sense of what the Spungens were dealing with. And this was because the doctor was European. I think she was Eastern European. And Nancy wanted to know what country she was from, and the doctor wouldn't tell her, and Nancy freaked out.
So the doctor finally got a firsthand glimpse of what the parents have been dealing with.
Yes. And it wasn't long after that the school counselor informed the Spungens that Nancy was no longer welcome in public school. They were not equipped to handle a child with Nancy's special behavioral needs. In September of 1969, Nancy was evaluated once more by doctors. They told the Spungens they didn't know what was wrong with Nancy. But years later, Deb Spungen will gain access to the doctor's notes and learn more. The doctors believed Nancy was suffering adult-like paranoid schizophrenia with mild depression. However, doctors were reluctant to diagnose schizophrenia in children. So instead of informing the Spungens about this possibility, they dismissed Nancy as a patient from their clinic. They told the Spungens they could no longer help her. So again, they're just on their own, and the doctors don't even tell them, "Hey, we think she might have schizophrenia."
Yeah, and it's like no one wants to be caught up dealing with Nancy or something. I don't know. It's very strange.
The Spungens were back at square one. When Nancy finally found another doctor who would see her, she attacked him during the first visit. In the meantime, Nancy isn't in school, and her parents are trying to find a private school that might take her. However, private schools are very expensive, and Nancy needed like a residential school. Like she needed a place where she could go, and they were equipped to deal with troubled children.
So where they'd have basically a full-on medical staff with doctors
Right.
and counselors and people with specific training, right?
During one turbulent incident, Nancy grabbed a hammer and started hitting her mother in the arms and shoulders with it. When her father was able to wrestle the hammer away, Nancy started beating him up with her fists. They locked her in the basement. They had like a finished basement, kind of like a den in the basement. They put her down there hoping that she would calm down and there wasn't anything that she could harm herself with down there, right? But instead, she trashed it during a 2-hour rampage. Thorazine was prescribed to calm the girl down. One night, Deb found Nancy in the kitchen with knives. Nancy was just out of it and kept saying she needed to stab brother and sister.
Oh my gosh.
Susie and David started sleeping with their bedroom doors locked. After a brief commitment at a mental hospital, Nancy was finally accepted at a private school in Connecticut called Barton, which was part of the Darlington Institute. And Darlington Institute had campuses kind of across the country, like in Texas and some different places.
Okay.
Very expensive. Now, this is in 1969, right? The cost was $850 a month, which was more than the family could afford. But they figured they would find the money somehow.
Wow.
Right?
Well, they're desperate to find somewhere.
Yes.
They're trying their best, as far as I can tell, to do the right thing by their daughter.
Yeah, Nancy's mom went back to work. All of the money she was making was going to pay Nancy's school.
Yeah, there's not many people. Well, let's just say there's a lot of people who couldn't afford $850 a month towards their child's schooling nowadays, let alone back then.
With Nancy gone, things seemed to blossom back home. Deb opened a health food store. The marriage thrived. Susie and David were doing well in school, but nobody wanted to admit that things were better without Nancy around. But it was true. Nancy was doing well too. Her school year went well. It was only when she returned the following fall that things fell apart. Nancy reverted to her old ways. By the winter break, things had essentially collapsed at Barton. When Nancy came home for Christmas break, she told her cousin that she had used heroin while at school and had an abortion.
Oh my gosh.
She's like 12.
Jesus.
Nancy's parents didn't know if she was telling the truth or if this was lies, because Nancy lied a lot. The school assured the Spungens that none of this was true. Nancy was kept under a watchful eye at the school, and there were no drugs on campus.
And there's not an abortion clinic on campus.
No, and it's a
either.
really rural area, so it's not like Nancy can just walk into town.
Right.
You know, it's very secluded school. They don't have visitors there.
So by all accounts, no one's believing that there's any truth to these statements.
Right. When she returned to school for the spring semester after this Christmas break, Nancy ran away. Once she was returned to the campus by law enforcement, it was just all downhill from there. Finally, Nancy's parents agreed to move her closer to home to Avon, which was called the Lakeside campus in Pennsylvania. And it's still part of this Darlington Institute.
Okay.
It was for older teens. And because Nancy was academically like way ahead of the other kids, they felt she might fit in better at this school. Even though her parents didn't really want her to go there because it was older teens.
Well, yeah, and that's also oftentimes you have these children that are very smart, academically advanced. They do fine with the schoolwork and stuff, but it's the social issues.
Well, that's the problem.
That's the problem. So I don't believe this is going to work out.
Well, and this Lakeside campus was kind of in town. It wasn't secluded. It wasn't in a rural area. The campus was open, so students could just walk off campus if they wanted to.
Okay.
Right. So Nancy's first night at this new school, she hitchhikes to her parents' house.
Hey, Mom and Dad.
Hey, she just shows up and I'm not going back there. But they forced her to go back to school. And like I said, the school housed older teens and there was less supervision than before. It was understaffed also, which is a problem. And the campus so open Nancy could leave anytime. She had begun smoking cigarettes and marijuana along with taking LSD while she's there. When she visited her family, the entire household revolved around Nancy from the minute she arrived. She had no compassion for anyone else. Nancy was a catalyst for infighting among the family, and she seemed to delight in pitting her relatives against each other. After a visit, Deb discovered her wedding ring was missing. Nancy had stolen it to buy drugs.
Oh my gosh.
She also stole her mother's opal pin and a silver ring. There was an incident at school in which Nancy cut her arms with scissors, and that led finally to some neurological testing. It was determined that Nancy had brain damage from birth. The neurologist said there was a behavioral syndrome of children who were born with organic brain dysfunction.
Never heard of that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is also like the early 70s.
Right.
I mean, I think they're basically saying that if you have brain damage, that can affect your behavior sometimes.
Oh, okay.
The impulse control, that kind of thing, right? And due to this diagnosis that she does have brain damage and has some neurological issues, they finally were able to get the state of Pennsylvania to award the Spungens $4,000 a year toward her private education. Like some kind of funding. So that's good. Okay, so by now Nancy's 14. And this is when she finally, she gets a boyfriend, Dylan. She meets a boy. His name is Jeff, and he's in a band.
Oh my gosh.
Nancy became obsessed with him. She considered herself to be, quote, the lady of the band. Nancy tattooed this guy's name on her chest, and she got a flower on her thigh, much to her parents' dismay. While high on LSD, Nancy tried to perform an abortion and was hospitalized.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. After this, Nancy ran away to New York City for 3 days and was eventually found at the Port Authority bus terminal.
Gosh, I don't know if I would have survived being Nancy's parent. Because, I mean, this is a lot.
Yeah.
And it's just been from day one.
Kind of unreal.
It's been from day one, which would make sense about the diagnosis, you know, her brain damage affecting her behavior. And that's just how she's always been from the word go, you know. But damn.
By the time she was 15, doctors finally diagnosed Nancy with schizophrenia. She had managed to finish her schoolwork and was set to graduate. Yet the Spungens knew their daughter was not ready for college, and they certainly did not want her to return home at that time. They tried to encourage Nancy to stay at school for another year, but she rebuked this idea, Dylan.
I shall not stay at school for another year.
No, she was not going to do it. When her parents informed her that she would stay at school for another year, Nancy cut her forearms with a razor blade. 2 weeks later, she attempted suicide again. Nancy was given 21 stitches on the arm.
Oh my gosh.
At 16, Nancy graduated from high school. She scored a 1030 on her SATs, which landed her acceptance at the University of Colorado. However, the Spungens were concerned because Boulder had a reputation as a party school.
Oh my gosh. Last place she needs to be.
But Nancy had her heart set on going, and she would not relent. But again, her parents feel like she's not ready to be on her own. She's 16. She's not emotionally mature enough to go off to college. It's a party school.
Yeah.
Like, it just doesn't seem like a good situation.
It's quite a ways. It's far away from home.
Hell yeah, it is. Pennsylvania to Colorado, that's got to be more
lot.
than 1,000 miles, right?
That's a lot of miles right there, I tell you.
And this is the 70s when airfare is not cheap, and it's a lot harder to get.
Travel was much harder to do.
It's a lot harder to get on a plane because you're going to be paying, tons of money.
I did not realize this. You actually pointed that out to me. We were watching something. Airfare used to be mostly the realm of business people, and the rich because it was so costly.
It was very expensive.
There weren't as many, cheaper Spirit Airlines, things like that make it a lot more cheaper if you actually get there.
Right. I mean, now you can find economical like flights,
right,
like you said,
because
but
their business
day,
model's different. They want to keep the
well, back
planes
in the day
full.
you had like Delta, Pan Am, like you didn't have Transatlantic, you did not have like these smaller companies. But she would not relent, as I said. Like, she was set on, she was going to school. And they wanted her, the college wanted Nancy to attend a summer program before the fall semester. So it was like a 6-week program in the summer. I guess kind of to set you up for college success.
Okay.
Right? So she had a few weeks of summer break before school started. And during that time, Nancy tried to get her driver's license, but she failed 3 times. When she couldn't pass her driver's test, she just stole her mother's car.
Well, I mean, that's a natural reaction.
Because she was wildly out of control and her parents just didn't know what to do with her. They agreed to hey, okay, fine, we'll let you go to Colorado. The 6-week program seemed to make Nancy happy. So when she gets to Boulder, she's taking a journalism and a marketing class. The summer courses went very well. She seems like she loves it. She comes back for a brief period before the fall semester. She seems like she's gung-ho. They're thinking, okay, maybe she's finally found her place. Nancy loves Colorado. She loves skiing. So she's like stoked to return to school.
And I'm sure this makes her parents very happy, that maybe she's finally found her spot, her lane to be in, and maybe everything will start to calm down for Nancy.
However, the fall semester was a different story. Nancy didn't like it. She didn't like college. She wasn't making friends. Then at the end of the fall semester, Nancy was arrested. Since she was only 16, she was charged as a juvenile, but the charges were for receiving stolen property.
Oh my gosh.
According to Nancy, someone had asked her to stash skis in her room, and it turns out they were stolen. Frank had to fly out to Boulder to pick up Nancy, and he was told by law enforcement that if he would just take Nancy back to Pennsylvania, they would not charge her.
And keep her there?
Yes.
So she's done here.
She's done here.
Oh my gosh, dude.
Leaving Colorado was a turning point for Nancy. It was as if Nancy finally hit her. She realized that she was not like other people and never would be.
Okay.
She felt purposeless. And now the burden was back on her family. As you can imagine, life in the Spungen home once Nancy returned was a total shit show, Dylan.
And it's sad that her family actually is able to breathe and feel better about everything when Nancy's not there. But how do you expect them to react?
Sometimes, Dylan, when you have toxic family members, even if you love them dearly,
right,
you can recognize that their presence is not good for the household.
Right.
Once they are kind of out of the picture or they're not there, the day-to-day does improve. I mean, it's sad to say, but I think a lot of us understand that feeling.
Yeah, and Nancy obviously has some profound issues, but when she's there, there's just not room for anyone else to blossom, grow, create.
She doesn't want anybody happy.
Yeah, I mean,
she wants to kind of make everybody fight and be miserable.
Right.
She feeds off of this negativity.
It's tough.
I mean, I've kind of known people like this, but on a very small scale compared to what it sounds like life with Nancy was like.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely. I know I've been around people, even in family, that were like this to a degree, not Nancy's level.
No.
Because this is a lot. I mean, and again, I feel bad for Nancy because it's obvious that she has profound issues. And now she may be leaning into it a little bit, when she could have a little bit more self-awareness and, kind of calm herself down a little bit. But, yeah, that's a tough situation. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if Nancy were a young person in today's modern world, there would be more help for her. Resources,
yes.
And she might be able to live a more quote unquote normal life, right?
And I think that's definitely the difference between nowadays and back then. Now, in a way, it's almost like some of these younger generation, they want to have some kind of disorder. Or, I mean, it's like so many of them and their friends have this or that. But no, it's Nancy can never get help. Her parents tried to get her help ever since she's been born, basically.
People today love trauma bonding. So.
And I think she did. The positive of nowadays is she would have certainly gotten help, more appropriate help sooner.
Yes. So the minute she gets back from Colorado, Dylan, guess what she does? She steals her mother's brand new Volvo and crashes it.
Oh my gosh, dude.
She doesn't have a license, and Pennsylvania had some strict laws about minors driving at after certain, there were kind of time restrictions.
Well, yeah.
So she's in trouble for that. She's in trouble for driving without a license.
So even if she had a license, she'd have still been violating the
she's
other
under 18.
of when she's driving, where she's driving.
Plus, it's like reckless driving. She's crashed. I mean, she's got like a lot of trouble here. And her friend, who happened to be a passenger, was injured. The friend's parents sued the Spungens insurance for $10,000. They had a hell of a time. They got dropped from their insurance. They had a hell of a time trying to find another insurance company that would cover them. It was a mess.
Mom's new car is screwed.
Yes. So in order to avoid Nancy being held at a juvenile facility, she was committed to a mental hospital. Excuse me.
Yeah, you're getting a big old frog in your throat.
I am.
Sexy frog.
I can't help it. I'm sick, bro.
She was committed to a mental hospital.
Yeah, the attorney was like, okay, so, finagling, I guess, some of the state laws. I'm no legal expert. I don't live in Pennsylvania. But at the time, if Nancy were committed to like a mental health facility, she would avoid going to the juvenile detention center.
Right. It's like, so if you go somewhere and get the help that we think you need, we'll forget the criminal side of it.
So it was a brief stay, by the way. During this time, Nancy's in the hospital. Deb unpacked her daughter's belongings from Colorado. She thought it would be a nice thing for Nancy to come home and have all of her stuff unpacked in her room, be ready for her, right? But while she's unpacking, she makes a startling discovery. Inside one of Nancy's suitcases, Deb finds syringes, a rubber catheter, and spoons.
Oh, no, it's a set of works.
Nancy was using heroin. Is that what they call it, a set of works?
Yeah.
I've never heard that.
Well, you've never heard that?
No.
Well, I've heard that.
Well, I also don't really know people who use heroin.
Well, I don't know people that use heroin either. I've seen on TV, for real.
The only thing I really know about heroin is watching, was that like Dope Sick Love?
Yeah.
That documentary.
Oh my gosh.
Very disturbing.
Yeah. A side note, if you've never seen Dope Sick Love, you've got to find it somewhere and watch it. And you will just be like, your jaw will be on the floor the entire time.
It's a lot.
It is a lot. It follows this couple as they pursue their heroin needs in New York City or somewhere like that.
I think they're in San Francisco.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
When Nancy was discharged from the mental hospital, and maybe it is New York, there's another documentary about heroin, and they're in San Francisco.
Oh,
and the
no.
Tenderloin.
These cats is getting like water out of the toilet to hit. They
Yes,
can't even wait long enough to find. Once they get their dope, they can't wait long enough to find a bottle of water somewhere. They're just going straight to it, bud.
Yeah, they're going hard.
They're going so hard in the paint.
When Nancy was discharged from the mental hospital, the staff told the Spungens it was too late to do much for their daughter and that they should have gotten her treatment sooner.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, again, it's like they've tried and they're still being blamed.
They've been trying this whole time.
Everyone was afraid of Nancy. She was physically violent, verbally abusive, and just generally hard to live with. She stole her mother's car again. Frank had to start taking the distributor cap off the car to keep Nancy from stealing it.
Damn, I hate to say it, but you need to put your keys away, girl.
When she tried to steal the car again and couldn't, she smashed her fist through the window saying, "See what you made me do?"
Oh my gosh. I mean, what do you do here?
I don't know.
I would have lost it along. I don't know if I could have made it as far as they have with this.
Nancy finally got a job, but she was fired the next day. And of course, she offered up no reason.
It was not her fault.
explanation.
It was somebody else's
She just
fault.
didn't say. She just didn't have a job anymore. Back home, Nancy slept all day. She went out at night. She was consumed with rock music and drugs. Her hippie attire that she had worn during her youth was traded in for tight pants, platform heels, heavy eye makeup. Nancy confided in Susie and David about her drug use. And of course, they told their parents. She was really into Quaaludes and confessed she had also begun shooting speed too.
Oh my gosh. That's not good for anybody. That's certainly not vitamins of any sort. But for someone like Nancy, this is the worst thing she could be doing.
And now, I've always heard of Quaaludes, Dylan, but I don't really know a lot about Quaaludes. Is that like an upper or a downer? Does that like...
I think it's a downer, but I don't know. That's well before my time of knowing about. But I think it was some kind of a downer, but they were very specific high that only came from the Quaalude. And they were the big deal for a long time until they just were
Well, yeah,
stopped
because I've
being
heard of
made.
them, especially a lot in the 70s. but I don't know. Like, I don't really know anything about them.
Remember, allegedly, when the Georgia Guidestones were blown up by either lightning or terrorists, no one knows what. It was either God or Osama bin Laden. Allegedly, there was some kind of a package under it. Do you remember this? There was some old Playboys. I think it's turned out to be a hoax, but and like 1,000 Quaaludes, which would be insane to find because they've been gone for so long. Isn't that weird?
I wonder why they stopped making them.
Probably because they're fucking dangerous.
Well, so is fentanyl, but they still making that shit.
Oh my God. What is that? Oh, that's a whole nother talk. I don't know what's going on with these drugs nowadays. They keep getting stronger and more deadly.
A friend would later say, quote, Nancy was always reaching for something that wasn't there. And sadly, Nancy was willing to do anything a man told her to do.
Which is funny because she's so, strong and I don't know what the right word is.
She's very like headstrong, stubborn.
Yes, towards everyone in her family and everyone in her life. But then she's gonna let some guy tell her what to do, even if it's dumb shit.
Yeah,
and that's very odd.
Yeah, and it is really sad to see. For the rest of the family, it seemed like there was no solution and no hope. Nancy would bring boys home and do drugs in her parents' house. She would have sex orgies at the home if her parents went out of town.
Oh my gosh.
I don't even know how you plan a sex orgy. Do you bring trail mix? Is it like, hey, we're going to have some deviled eggs and some
Gatorade
sex orgy? Come on over.
Bring your electrolytes and trail mix.
Yeah, I don't know. I've always been curious about that. Do you send out like an Evite?
Do you RSVP?
Do you just go around and like, hey, you guys want to come over and have an orgy? Or does it just happen? I mean, I don't know. You can send me a message if you know how one plans an orgy.
Yes, at mountainmurderspodcast@gmail.com.
Yes, please. One night, Nancy returned home beaten and bloody. She'd been in Philadelphia, and she told her parents she'd been robbed at gunpoint. But her parents didn't know if she was telling the truth.
Because they never know if she's telling the truth because she tells all these outlandish stories. But at the same time, she's involved in real outlandish situations. So what you don't know what to think every time something happens or she says something happened.
In Philadelphia, she began going backstage at concerts and partying with the band's hotel after parties. She told her sister Susie she had slept with the entire Bad Company band.
Oh, my gosh.
Okay, Simon Kirk. She gave hand jobs to members of Aerosmith. She slept with members of The Who, the Allman Brothers, and the J. Giles Band. I wonder if they wrote Angel in the Centerfold or whatever about her.
That's a pretty good...
Angel is a centerfold. Love. Okay.
Pretty good lineup of groupie sleep withs, I guess.
Susie told her mother, but again, they didn't know if Nancy was being truthful. Or if this was like she's just trying to impress her sister, or is she really sleeping with these rock stars?
I gave Steven Tyler a hand job on Wednesday night.
Yeah, and she would sit with her sister and like rank the members of the band according to their sexual prowess.
Oh, wow.
So again, like, is she for real? Because again, like Deb thinks maybe Nancy's lying and she doesn't know. And of course, this is not anything a mom wants to hear about her child.
No mom wants to hear that about any of their children.
They call them bad company till the day they die, Dylan. Okay, so one day the Spungens come home and they find Nancy partying at their house with a British band called Pretty Things.
The whole band?
The whole band. And all these like entourage hangers on people.
Yeah, hello, governor. We're just here to make a little music and have sex with your daughter.
Oi!
Oi, oi, oi.
Band members were swimming in the family pool. They were hanging out in Nancy's room. And her family just could not live this way. I mean, her parents are like, there are these random dudes in our house. You've got a little sister, a little brother. Like, we can't have this.
Dude, this is way too much.
Yeah. Nancy's presence just deprived everyone of normalcy. At this point, it is obvious that Nancy has abandoned any notion of getting a job. Her parents have just like given up. She just sleeps all day, parties all night. Out of options, Nancy's parents finally agree to her dream, Dylan, of moving to New York City.
To let her move to New York? So They're trying to get some space between them and Nancy. And I got to say, I can't blame them.
No, they really are. They agree that they will pay $200 a month toward an apartment for Nancy. She had talked incessantly about moving to New York, where she wanted to work in the music business. Yet Nancy didn't have any real skills, and her parents knew it was very unlikely Nancy would end up working in the music business.
They just want Nancy to go to New York.
But they are just kind of ready for her to be out of their house at this point. After finding an apartment in the city, Nancy was on her own. Now, at first, New York City seemed fine. She called home and would tell her mom about hanging out at places like CBGB's,
Wow.
the happening place, and Max's Kansas City, and a lot of other hot spots around town where she mingled with musicians. She was excited to be neighbors with Lance Loud, who had appeared on the PBS documentary called An American Family, which had sparked controversy in the early 1970s. Loud formed his own music group, The Mumps, and he wrote for rock music magazine Cream and kind of became a bit of a gay icon.
Okay.
He was friends with, what's his face? Andy Warhol, that kind of thing. He and Nancy formed a fast friendship, and at one point, he saves Nancy's life when she overdoses on drugs. And we'll talk about that in a minute. The first sign of trouble came on Christmas Day of 1974. Nancy called home asking for money. It was clear she was on drugs. Nancy demanded that her parents send the $200 rent money directly to her. Deb informed her daughter that the money would be paid to the landlord. Nancy threw a tantrum on the phone and eventually hung up on her. When her mom made a trip to New York City, because, she starts feeling kind of guilty because Nancy's out of money.
But you're probably going to check on her.
So she goes to check on her, and she buys some groceries. She's going to take, because her daughter's like, I don't have any money. I need food. Send me that money, whatever. So she goes to check on her. She drops off groceries, and Deb could see that her daughter was strung out. Nancy's appearance was gaunt, thin, and she had dark circles under her eyes. Nancy was dirty, which was unusual because she was always really concerned about her appearance. Was always clean, hair done, makeup did.
Right. No matter what look she's going for, she wanted to be Nelly.
Right. But she's just like dirty.
Doesn't care about.
Unkempt. Yes. The apartment smelled of old cat litter and was also in poor shape. Nancy claimed that she had been sick, and that's why things looked the way that they did.
Right.
However, she did talk about having a job selling old clothing in a basement store in St. Mark's Place. But the job was short-lived. Once more, Nancy began calling home. And now you have to remember, she's calling home collect, which was very expensive. Long-distance phone calls back in the day.
Yeah, it was a big deal to talk to somebody long distance, especially before 9 p.m. when the rates dropped.
Yeah. So she would call home collect 3 to 5 times a day asking for money.
Well, hold up now.
She refused to talk to anyone in the family but her mom.
Now she's literally adding hundreds of dollars to their phone bill doing this.
Yes. And when her dad would answer, she would just like cuss him and hang up.
Oh, because she felt like she'd get over on mom easier or something?
Well, she just didn't want to have anything to do with her dad. She was rude and mean. She would just call him like
Wait a second,
a
you call me
shithead and a fuckface. I mean,
you called me collect to cuss me?
Yeah, so during this period, she's decided she hates her dad.
Now, there used to be a thing you could do with collect because it would be in the say your name.
Ah, yeah.
Say your name, and then you would say your name, and it would play a little auto your name to the person accepting the call. You could actually give them a message.
Yes.
Like pick me up or meet me over here, and you could do it for free.
I think many of us know that old trick, especially if we grew up poor.
Yes, sir.
Right. So when Nancy was told no, that we're not sending you money, she began calling her relatives demanding money. Aunts, uncles, cousins, grandma, like it didn't matter. Frank and Deb had forewarned family members to decline Nancy's requests for money. So when relatives refused to send her money, Nancy would threaten to burn down their houses. She would often hurl threats that she knew people who were in biker gangs or organized crime, and then all she had to do was make a call and they would kill for her.
So now that you've threatened my life and all my personal property, I've changed my mind. I'm going to give you the money. I'm sure that worked out real nice.
Yep. So during these calls home, not only was she begging for money, but Nancy complained that no one liked her and she had no friends. It just seemed that Nancy was unable to cope with the world. Like just the day-to-day living.
Well, yeah, she already had these major issues, and now she's strung out on drugs, and that's not going to help out.
Because honestly, I'm like, you're going to complain that nobody likes you? I don't give a fuck if anybody likes. I'm never going to call home and be like, nobody likes me. Because my attitude is, I don't give a fuck if you like me.
Well, no, but you're not completely out of control like this either.
I'm just saying.
And during all this, now, besides her mental issues and stuff,
But I'm just saying, most people, probably would not be like that heartbroken if strangers or acquaintances or people they worked with weren't their best friends or didn't like them.
Right.
I mean, most normal people can just kind of function throughout the day. Like,
well, that's a sign of emotional immaturity.
Yes.
For you to be like, nobody likes me, man. Yeah. I mean, come on.
By January 1975, Nancy discovered the punk scene, the burgeoning punk scene in New York City.
And she's right there in the middle of it.
I'm telling you, Dylan, what a time to be alive. Like, I would love to have been
at a
there.
Gigi Allen show getting shit thrown in your face.
That wasn't really in the late 70s.
Okay.
Gigi was more in the 80s, but just being at CBGB, seeing bands like Television and the Dead Boys.
Right.
This isn't my shit, Dylan.
All right. Damn.
So once Nancy finds the punk scene, the calls taper off for a while. Nancy was enthralled with punk music, the clothing, the attitude. It offered everything she was looking for. Nancy began sleeping all day, partying all night. She told her mother about bands no one had heard of yet, like Blondie, the Ramones, the New York Dolls. Nancy seemed to have her finger on the pulse of those who would be the next big thing.
Wow.
Yeah. She began writing little critiques for a Greenwich Village rock music publication. And by all accounts, she was actually a really talented writer. Like, she knew what she was talking about. The articles were clear, concise. They were really well done. However, the freelance writing was unpaid.
Nice.
As most of us know, if we do freelance writing, people don't want to pay you. Nancy considered Debbie Harry of Blondie to be a friend. For years, she would carry a photo of them together in a photo album that she took everywhere. Nancy, along with Debbie, bleached their hair blonde together for the first time.
Wow.
Once, when Deb stopped by to visit her daughter, she met a friend named Richard Hell. And little did Deb know, he was a musician, considered kind of a, like, Kickstarter for punk music in the States.
Really?
He played in the bands Television and the Voidoids, which inspired singers like Patti Smith. Deb thought he was a nice young man when she met him. Isn't that crazy to think you just stop by and someone who's kind of a, I guess a
catalyst of the
like
punk scene,
a cultural icon, is just hanging out, and then you meet them, and years later you're like, oh, that nice young man was kind of a big deal, right? By now, Nancy had dyed her dark locks platinum blonde. She got a job as a topless go-go dancer in Times Square. She earned between $200 to $300 a night. Deb didn't want to believe that her daughter was doing sex work, but it has been said that Nancy was a part-time prostitute as well. A former friend named Karen from back home had called Nancy once to inform her that her father had passed away. Nancy told her she was with a client and abruptly hung up the phone, which hurt her friend Karen's feelings.
Wow.
It was during this time that Nancy was finally able to pay bills on her own without her parents' financial backing.
Well, and I think
so she was proud of herself.
Well, it's what's happened is she's found something she's really into. She certainly wants to stay there in New York, and her parents were not supplementing her life entirely. They were trying to help at least with rent, and I'm sure a few bucks here and there. But now Nancy's found something she's really into, and she certainly wants to be able to facilitate her staying there.
She wants to be able to bankroll her lifestyle.
Yeah, and continue doing what she's doing.
Plus, this go-go dancing, stripping, whatever you want to call it at the time, kind of fit into her lifestyle anyway. Because she likes to sleep all day. She dances at night. She goes
money
out after. She can stay up all night partying after she works. And it sounds like she was kind of with an agency that would book her. So she wasn't really at like any specific club.
Okay.
She would go every day and get her bookings and would work kind of at different places. And you have to think about 1970s, Dylan, New York City. Times Square is not, It was not like it is today.
It was not Disney family friendly.
It was
Times
not
Square.
a family friendly tourist destination. It was seedy.
Yep.
Sex workers, adult film,
Peep shows.
Yes.
Theaters
if you've
playing
ever
the porn.
seen The Deuce on HBO, perfectly like encompasses what was happening.
High
at this
crime
time.
rates, dangerous. Just the city in general was very, very gritty and dark, like a Christopher Nolan movie. Like you expect Batman to come around the cold corner.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, really.
It lasted a short while because Nancy started using heroin again. This time, it got so bad, she lost her dance bookings. Nancy had track marks on her arm, and she would nod off. Her parents visited her in New York City and took her to dinner, and Nancy fell asleep in her plate of food at a restaurant. Like her mom said, she kind of passed out into like a plate of spaghetti and ended up getting like marinara sauce all over her shirt.
I've had my instances with, using substances, never heroin, but I just don't get it. I mean, you were discussing this the other night. I don't get why you would want to do heroin, because it's like you do it and then you like nod off for some hours and then you kind of come to, and then in a very short time, if you don't do it again, you get violently ill. I mean, it just seems like
I'm just like, what's the pleasure? Because you
fun. It doesn't seem fun at all.
Well, you just immediately kind of zonk out.
Yeah. I mean, I guess they're on some kind of a wave or a ride in their head maybe, but I just really don't get it. I've never understood the appeal, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Because I don't think you'd want to see me on heroin. Because I sleep enough without
Look,
it.
I don't want to see you on anything, Dylan.
Well, I'm not on anything.
You're pleasant when you're sober.
I'm only substances I got on me right now is a Monster Energy and some NyQuil.
Good.
And a little bit of nicotine.
Good.
I've been so sick, I ain't hardly smoked, girl.
Good.
You know how bad that is?
Yeah.
No,
You need to stop all that shit.
I am going to
It's so
stop
bad
all that.
for
I'm
you.
going to stop all that. And this year is going to be the healthy dealing year. Let's go.
So at one point, Nancy calls home begging for her parents to come get her. She just wants to come home and detox. Like, it's so out of control. And she recognizes that, like, this is not going well for me. Her mom wrote in the book that we'll talk about, her mother wrote a book, but her mom wrote about Nancy just like writhing in pain on the floor. She's very sick. She's going through heroin withdrawals.
She's dope sick.
Which can be very dangerous.
It can kill you.
And like her parents didn't really know what to do and they thought they should take her to the hospital, but she's refusing to go and she's throwing up and she's just not doing well at all. So in early May, Nancy started a methadone program in New York City. Like after she detoxes, she goes back to the city. She tells her parents, she's like, I'm going to get clean. So she does find a methadone program. She did the program for 4 weeks. She got clean and seemed happier and healthier. So she goes back to work, but shortly after, a strip club where she was working got raided for their liquor licensing or whatever. And Nancy was arrested and given a $150 ticket, which her parents had to pay. Then she gets back on heroin. Now, at one point, Nancy tells her mother, quote, "Never trust a junkie, not even your daughter."
A sage advice.
That summer, she overdosed, and her neighbor, Lance Loud, saved her life. Scared straight again, Nancy got back on methadone, and she was clean through the fall and winter. Nancy's lease would soon be up, and her parents were like, are you going to renew the lease? Like, what are your plans? That's when she starts floating the idea that she wants to go to London.
Really?
Her parents tried to discourage this trip, considering that Nancy didn't have a job or a place to live. She doesn't really know anybody in London.
And how are you going to get over there? With this expensive airfare, now you're going to fly across the pond?
Nancy's friends like Debbie Harry had gone to London, and punk music was really starting to take off there.
So that's a whole draw to London for her, is the punk music scene, basically.
Yes. And a lot of the artists that she knew in New York, the New York Dolls, Debbie Harry, a lot of those folks had gone to London. So she wants to go. She thinks it's like the place to be. Undeterred by her parents' opinion, Nancy began saving money for this London trip. So she's again working as a go-go dancer and trying to save all of her cash so she can do this trip. Frank Spungen summed up his daughter by saying, quote, Nancy doesn't live by the same set of rules as the rest of us. And this was true. Nancy did what Nancy wanted, and Nancy wanted to go to London. When Nancy turned 19 on February 27th of 1977, she had already made plans to travel to England, yet she hadn't saved up enough money to cover the total cost of the trip. She hounded her mother, Deb, to cash in a savings certificate that had been gifted to her by her great-grandfather. It was worth $1,500, which at the time was quite a bit of money. Finally, Deb relented. She knew Nancy would not stop until the money was in her hand. Deb allowed Nancy to use $500 from the savings certificate to buy a plane ticket. But of course, Deb doesn't trust her daughter, so she books it directly through a travel agent, and it was a flight into Amsterdam, and then she would get a connecting flight into London. Nancy was set to depart the first week in March. Nancy's friend Richard Hell and his band, the Heartbreakers, would be traveling to London as well. It has been said by many, including Viv Albertine of the band The Slits, which if you're not a punk music person, it's an all-girl band, and they fucking kick ass.
Oh my gosh, what a name.
So Viv Albertine has said that the Heartbreakers were responsible for bringing heroin to the London punk scene.
Oh my gosh.
But when Nancy left for London, she was clean, according to her parents. From the start, the London trip was a disaster, okay? Nancy missed her connecting flight. Would you please stop fidgeting?
Sorry.
Nancy missed her connecting flight into London. She ended up having to take a bus.
So she got stuck in Amsterdam.
Yes.
Probably was getting high, bro.
I don't know. Nancy, when she gets to London, she starts couch surfing. She's crashing with friends just wherever she can stay. She doesn't have a place to live. She doesn't have a job. Just kind of
winging it,
wandering around the city.
That's probably not a good idea when you're wandering around on another continent.
Yeah, within like 2 weeks, she's totally out of money. All the money she'd saved. Word spread that a groupie from New York City had arrived in London.
Oh my gosh.
Viv Albertine's book, Clothes, 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 Music, 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 Boys, 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 a memoir.
So I would admit, or I would imagine the punk scene there in London is probably a fairly tight-knit group of people.
Yeah, well, the whole punk scene from New York to London only had about 200 people.
Oh, okay.
So, like, everybody knew
Everybody knew everybody.
Yeah, super small. So, again, Viv Albertine's book, which I did read and was a resource today. Do you want me to go through that title again?
Yeah, say it one more time.
Clothes, 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 Music, 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 Boys, 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 a memoir.
Nice.
Yeah, that sounds like my memoir. She discusses Nancy's arrival in London. Viv notes this was a first because there weren't really groupies in punk music. So Nancy is like punk music's only groupie. So word spread fast. There's a groupie from New York in town.
Yeah.
And of course, Viv writes that she imagined this very glamorous, like sophisticated groupie, right? And oh, I bet she's beautiful and super sexy and well-dressed. And she was kind of shocked when she meets Nancy. Like any group, groupie, if you will, Dylan, Nancy first went for the singer of the band. At the Roxy, which was a club in London, Nancy first tries to hook up with Johnny Rotten, whose real name is John Lydon, and he is the singer of this band, the Sex Pistols. Johnny Rotten was not interested, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. So Nancy tries for the guitarist Steve Jones, and when he refuses Nancy, she kind of moved down the line through the band.
I mean, it's her life to live, but this seems weird to me. It seems like it doesn't seem like you're respecting yourself to act like this. But hey, I mean, who am I to judge?
The Heartbreakers are at the Roxy too on this particular night. So Viv Albertine describes the atmosphere as being, quote, a bit more exciting than usual. She spots Nancy slinking around all pouty. Albertine says Nancy's stuck out a mile and doesn't look right at all. Like she's not fit in. And immediately she's like, that's the groupie from New York. She described Nancy as having bleach blonde hair, but an old lady yellow color.
Oh, no.
with curls styled in a wedge shape.
She needs some toner on that
She
shit.
does. She's wearing tons of leopard print, but it reminds Albertine of an old barmaid and compares her to Bette Lynch, a British actress. And by the way, this is not a compliment.
So Nancy's kind of a spectacle, and not in a good way, right?
Yes.
If you can be a spectacle in a good way.
Rumors have already spread that Nancy takes smack, so Viv Albertine immediately isn't that interested in getting to know her. Towards the end of the evening, Nancy is lurking behind a pillar at the club, leaning forward out of the shadows, and she does sort of a sexy beckon with her finger. So Viv Albertine is like watching this and is like, who is she trying to beckon, trying to get to come over? And the fellow who trots over like a puppy dog is Sid Vicious.
Oh, no.
Viv Albertine can't believe her normally cynical friend is falling for this act. Sid later reveals that very evening, Nancy gave him heroin and a blowjob. Sid Vicious had never taken smack before, and that was it. From that moment on, Sid and Nancy were inseparable. Albertine says, quote, I think one of the most shocking things he's ever done is get involved with Nancy Spungen. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about Sid Vicious.
Sid Vicious. Now, I didn't know any of this about him that you've been telling me. So go ahead.
John Simon Ritchie was born May 10th, 1957 in Lewisham to John and Ann Ritchie. Ann was a high school dropout who joined the Army, and that's where she met her husband, John. He was a guard at Buckingham Palace and a semi-professional trombone player in London's jazz scene. Anne and her young son moved to Ibiza, but they are soon abandoned by John, who also did not provide any financial support.
Damn, John.
Anne sold marijuana to make ends meet. When she returns to England, she ends up marrying a man named Christopher Beverley, who dies of kidney failure only 6 months later. It has also been said that Anne Beverley was in a relationship with Ray Davies of the Kinks.
Really?
And that Ray Davies would babysit her young son, John. Sid Vicious. By the early 1970s, Anne was a full-blown heroin addict. So her son John had a pretty tumultuous life, traumatic childhood, and his mother has become a drug addict.
Yeah, not many people have ever said in the past, I'm glad my parents were heroin addicts.
At 16, Anne kicked her son out of the house. He was a student at this time at Westminster Kingsway College, a vocational school for troubled students. And that is where he befriended John Lydon, a.k.a. Johnny Rotten. The pair would become good friends. In 1973, the two Johns, along with two other friends named John, so they were kind of known as the Four Johns.
The Four Johns?
Yes. They dropped out of school and began staying in squats. Johnny Rotten was born. He was given that nickname. And John Beverley, because at that time, Sid Vicious was going by his stepfather's last name, so he was John Beverley. They nicknamed him Sid Vicious, which was actually a joke among the group because one of the Johns had like a hamster named Sid.
Okay.
And I think it bit Sid Vicious.
Oh,
and
so
that's why they started calling him
Sid's Vicious.
Yeah, so it was actually just a joke.
From a hamster.
Right, because Sid really was, John Ritchie wasn't really John Beverley, whatever you want to call him. He wasn't really vicious at all.
Right. It's they're just creating personas. They're creating almost characters for themselves.
Yes.
Because they want to obviously get into punk and, do this thing. And there's an aesthetic there. That's a big part of the whole image.
The four young men started hanging around an area in Chelsea, London called King's Road. It was considered the epicenter of swinging London, where music and fashion emerged. So think of Austin Powers.
Yeah.
The swinging 60s. Yeah, baby.
Okay.
So the swinging London.
So they're in the middle of it. They're in the heart of it.
Well, yeah, but by this time, the like swinging London of the 60s had kind of started to die out.
But yeah,
you got kind of these new subcultures emerging.
Right.
So a favorite spot where they liked to hang out was owned by fashion designer Vivienne Westwood and her boyfriend Malcolm McLaren. It was a store called Sex, which sold leather clothing, vinyl, rubber, like jewelry with spikes, bondage gear, and other, quote, sexually oriented merchandise.
Oh, okay. You would go in this store, wouldn't you?
Well, yeah, of course. McLaren had owned the shop for a minute. And previously he had sold like 50s vintage fashion and like retro records. And it was like rockabilly and all 1950s gear. But he soon realized this kind of emerging group of young people were not really into that.
Right.
But this like leather and the spikes and all that was kind of more like fashion forward.
The scene was changing.
So he decided to open Sex. McLaren had become acquainted with the New York Dolls and had followed them back to the United States to work as their manager. Upon his return to London, he changed the store to Sex because he kind of discovered punk rock in New York City and wanted to bring that back with him. And he also gave birth to an idea. He would form a punk group like the Dolls, and he wanted to call this group the Sex Pistols.
So he wants to put together a boy band.
He
basically.
does. He wants to put together a boy band.
A really funky, pale-skinned, black-leathered boy band with spikes.
You could say that.
Okay.
And some people have compared the Sex Pistols to being a boy band.
Well, I mean, it's the same.
And some people trash the Pistols. But you know what? I think they have their place in punk history. And I think what they did was kind of fucking badass for the time. So,
well, I mean, it's the same concept. He wants to find the right people
Yes.
to put a band together. It's not, it's been done many times before in all different genres of music.
right. So while hanging out at Sex, Sid Vicious makes friends with an American expatriate named Chrissy Hind. And this is before she started the band The Pretenders. According to Viv Albertine, Chrissy Hind tried to recruit people to join her band. She wanted to start a band, but she was too talented, so no one wanted to be in a band with her.
Because she was outshining everybody?
Because Chrissy Hind is fucking amazing. I love The Pretenders.
I would want to be in a band with the talented people.
But most of these people were like, they had just learned instruments or they weren't that great,
So, see, that's the difference here that I wasn't expecting. I would think a lot of these people have all been playing whatever instrument, guitar, bass, whatever, drums, for all their life. But I guess it's not how it works out sometimes. As you have this new emerging scene, you have people who have ideas about looks and fashion. What's amazing about this scene is I think fashion plays just as much, which is true to a degree in any scene. But fashion was a big part of this because it was so different from what had come before.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's almost like a generational divide being...
Right. And so kind of what... I mean, I'm no music historian, but I feel like I know a little bit about a little bit, right?
Oh, my God. Here we go. No, you do. You do.
No, I mean, I could probably do a music podcast.
Yes, you can be a well-actually person.
Well, actually.
Yes.
So, from the 60s, when you had like Hendrix and the Doors, right?
Right.
You ended up kind of having this bridge to punk rock through glam rock.
Okay.
Like David Bowie.
That makes sense.
He's a glam rocker. Like that was his sort of thing back then. You had the New York Dolls. They became kind of punk, but they were like more of a glam rock band. So you kind of had that glam rock, which was very fashion forward and oriented, like
right.
a big
and also,
part of the scene.
The male androgyny started bleeding into it. You know what I mean?
And so from that glam rock, you kind of get into punk, and it had its own thing, right? Anyway, back to our story. Chrissy Hind tried to get Vicious to marry her in order to get a work permit so she could work in England, but he wouldn't do it, which I just thought was kind of a funny story. During this time, Rotten and Vicious started busking to earn money. Johnny Rotten would sing while Vicious played tambourine or guitar. They did covers of Alice Cooper.
Nice.
On the streets.
On the corner.
They did. In 1975, Johnny Rotten joined the Sex Pistols with Steve Jones, Glenn Matlock, and Paul Cook. By now, Malcolm McLaren is managing the band. There have been plenty of people over the years who trashed the Pistols and Vicious, saying he couldn't play an instrument. So let's talk about this. Viv Albertine and Sid Vicious, when Johnny Rotten joins the Sex Pistols, Albertine and Sid Vicious join the Flowers of Romance alongside Keith Levine, who would go on to form The Clash.
Wow, these names being thrown around here, it's pretty crazy.
During this time, Sid learned to play bass guitar by listening to the Ramones. And he liked the Ramones. That was, one of his jams. And he started applying the basic beat and pattern of like the Ramones guitar riffs to these other songs. So all in all, Sid Vicious basically like copied the Ramones, and that's what he could play. He was not a super talented bass guitar player, but he could play a little bit.
He could play enough to get by, but he had the look.
He did.
I'm going to guess.
Absolutely.
The look and the attitude.
That's absolutely done.
Which was very important.
It was in June of 1976 that Sid attended a Sex Pistols show at the 100 Club. Sid ends up beating up Chrissie Hynde's boyfriend with a rusted motorcycle chain, which he carried with him at all times. And it has been said that the reason he attacked her boyfriend is because he was abusive, and Sid found out this guy had beat up Chrissie Hynde, and that was his friend. So he attacked this dude.
Was he in a 1950s gang? Street gang? Was he always keeping his rusty razor? Is he like Joe Biden? He puts the rusty razor blade, they scrub him on the curb and get him all rusted up and keep him in the rain barrel out back until it's time to go.
Is that what Joe Biden does?
He said that one time when he's talking about popcorn down there at the pool. And oh my gosh, I can't right now. Yeah. Yeah, when the guy told the guy to stay on the other side of the line, not to be going on over in the deep water or whatever, and he threatened him, and he went out in the street, and yeah, anywho. But no, a rusty bike chain.
Motorcycle chain.
Motorcycle chain.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, hey, this was the mean streets of London. It's a hard knock life.
It is.
And Dylan punks were fighting all the time. They were fighting with the Teddies.
The Teddies?
The Teddies.
The Roosevelts?
No.
Oh.
And they were getting in a fight with the Teddy Boys.
So it's like whatever, bro. Is that like the Greasers and the Socias? The Teddies or the Socias?
Well, I guess the Teddies were it was a subculture that started in the 50s, and they wore like sharp tailored suits.
Oh.
Yeah. So they kind of, I guess, morphed into maybe what you would call like mods.
Okay.
But they would fight with the punks.
Okay.
These different subcultures would clash. They would have rumbles. So he had to carry a rusted motorcycle chain.
Let's go, man.
Some of the songs that were written by the Flowers of Romance would be played by other bands, though they never actually performed live themselves or recorded any music together. The punk band The Damned considered hiring Vicious as a bass player, but he failed to show up for their audition. In September of 1976, Sid played drums for Susie and the Banshees at the 100 Club. So again, we're dropping some names here.
All the names.
Yeah.
I mean, really.
And even though people today are like, oh, he couldn't play an instrument. I mean, he's playing with some bands
He still played
that
with them
kinda
at a show.
Go on to be pretty famous. By early 1977, McLaren kicked Glenn Matlock out of the Sex Pistols, apparently for liking the Beatles, which seems legitimate to me. I'm not a Beatles fan.
Well, no, you're supposed to be punk, bro. You can't be going around talking about how awesome John Lennon is.
How much you like the Yellow Submarine?
No, that's like the other end of the spectrum away from where they are in music. You know what I'm saying?
Matlock and Rotten butted heads quite often, and he says, it was kind of his choice to leave the band too because it was just chaos.
Right.
Nobody really knew what they were doing, that kind of thing. McLaren wanted Sid Vicious in the band. He stated, quote, "If Johnny Rotten is the voice of punk, then Vicious is the attitude." And again, he's all about this image.
Well, he carries a rusty motorcycle chain. So, I mean, what else do I need to say, bud?
A friend will describe Sid Vicious as being the, quote, "sacrificial lamb for punk music." He says, and this is another quote, "None of them would have gone over the top. He was their kamikaze pilot, and they were too happy to strap him in and send him off."
There you go.
Self-destructive. McLaren would say, quote, "Their public persona was not a gimmick. It expressed their real attitude toward life. They were into chaos." So by 1977, England was seeing rampant inflation and unemployment. There was a wide range of strikes, political upheaval, power cuts. The U.S. oil crisis was largely to blame for the trouble in England. Yet the disaffected youth took to the streets to react, and punk was a great rebellion for this. Like, punk music was speaking out against these issues, not being able to find a job. They didn't like the Queen.
Right.
It also coincided with Queen Elizabeth II's Silver Jubilee. It was happening. And the Sex Pistols released God Save the Queen. There was a moral panic that swept the nation. The song was banned by the BBC and wouldn't be played on radio. The line, fascist regime, and the criticisms of the crown were so subversive. And people were just like, oh, who is this band?
Oh my
How
gosh.
dare they say this stuff about our queen?
They're going to destroy everything that we've created.
We love the Queen, Mom, and we love colonialism. How
Yeah.
dare you? While Johnny Rotten voiced the anguish of a generation, Vicious's boisterous behavior and carefree attitude, which sometimes included violent antics, seemed to electrify audiences. There was something raw and intense about Sid Vicious. Yet those who knew him thought he was quiet, depressed, and that he just drank away his troubles. So kind of his image was not really who he was as a person. I mean, not deep down. From the beginning, McLaren and Sid's bandmates treated Nancy badly. So now Sid and Nancy have met, that we've talked about Sid a little bit. Johnny Rotten said, quote, "The biggest joke of all was Sid would never have hooked up with a girl like Nancy unless I introduced her to him, which I did. So I take some really serious sense of responsibility in Sid's demise because of that. I miss my friends." The relationship between Sid and Nancy had been described in a number of ways. Many felt the pair truly loved each other. Some described the relationship as completely toxic. There was always crying, fighting, screaming, nodding off, arguing, or busting on other people. Nancy would egg Sid into fights, saying, "Hit that wank off, Sid," or "That skank is looking at you. Go over there and smack her."
Well, what they're describing is two addicts being together. I mean, this is just typical addict couple behavior. I mean, it really is. One day you see them, they're all happy, they're bubbly, they're, happy together. They just got their drugs, whatever drug of choice. And like 2 hours later, you see them and they're fighting like cats and dogs because now the drugs are gone or whatever. And then they've turned on each other. It's the drugs, bud.
And Nancy knew that Sid wasn't like a natural fighter. He's like 6'3" and weighs like 130 pounds. He's like a little skinny, real thin guy, right? But she just loved drama.
Right.
So she would always encourage him to get into fights.
Well, she's always it's like she's comfortable around chaos because her entire life she's created chaos directly around her, and she could care less how it affected other people. Now, whether or not that's intentional on her part or it's because of the issues she deals with, I mean, that's to be decided. But she certainly doesn't mind chaos. I think we know that.
And Nancy was always seeking someone to fight or argue with and wanted to be the center of attention, even if it was negative attention. Like, even if being the center of attention meant, like, you get into a fight and cause a big scene.
You're the center of attention because
she still liked it because she wanted to be the center of attention.
Everybody's looking at you because you're being crazy as hell and screaming your head off. She does, yeah, that's fine.
In Vicious, Nancy found a naturally shy soul, one endearing of her hard edges, as well as the irresistible pull of the star on the rise. And in Spungen, he found someone experienced and nurturing, kind of in grown-up matters, like sex and drugs, because he was probably a virgin before he met Nancy.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, he was not a ladies' man. He was shy. He was like a little nerdy. So a lot of people speculate that like he'd probably never even been with a woman before he met Nancy.
Well, that's why that first shot of heroin and the blowjob really cemented the relationship for him.
And she also kind of provided his a brand of affection because, she was really doting and like he kind of needed that. He needed someone to dote on him and kind of mother him a little bit. And then Nancy needed somebody to, she was real needy. So she needed someone she could kind of cling on to, right? So just maybe not a good mix.
No.
Or maybe if they were sober, they would have been better for each other.
Right.
According to Sid's Way, the life and death of Sid Vicious, the couple moved into a flat in the quiet West London neighborhood of Maida Vale, where they sunk further into heavy drug use and fended off intrusions from the police. Nancy phoned home regularly asking for money, and Deb finally sent the remaining $1,000 of that savings certificate to Nancy. Meanwhile, the rest of the Pistols, not exactly a harmonious unit to begin with, just chafed at this presence of the American groupie Nancy. They called her Nauseating Nancy. That became her nickname. They hated her. They were very mean to her. They didn't want her around. At one point, Malcolm McLaren, the manager, tried to have her kidnapped and put on a plane to New York.
Oh my gosh.
Like he wanted to get rid of her. Everybody did.
Where do you just call up and order a kidnapping?
In January of 1978, the Sex Pistols embarked on a U.S. tour. Their one and only, Dylan. McLaren refused to allow Nancy to go on this tour. He didn't like her, and he felt she was disruptive. Plus, Nancy held too much power over Sid. The Pistols were not booked in major cities like New York or L.A., but instead, their concerts were going to be in these rundown venues throughout the South.
Wow.
It was enemy territory. From the start, the tour was doomed.
Why not? What the hell? So you have this burgeoning. Is it still coming? Is it still coming about the punk scene?
Yeah.
So you're gonna
It's not really mainstream.
So you're gonna do a bunch of dinky old gross venues in the South?
In the South.
I'm not saying you don't have any fans there, but you're gonna have a lot of people that turn out to counter protest you, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. So tour manager Noel Monk details the experience in the book 12 Days on the Road, The Sex Pistols in America, which I read many years ago. I used to own this book. The tour was plagued with out-of-tune instruments, Sid's addiction, Johnny Rotten's tirades. Like he would just bitch and complain and was grumpy and moody all the time. The other members of the band are just like,
oh my
shut
God.
the fuck up.
Jesus.
I mean, it was just not good. And then physical violence with the audience.
Yeah.
They would get into fist fights with the audience. Yet, despite their antics of, these punk rock attitudes, the sex, drugs, rock and roll, some club owners said they were fairly professional on stage. That actually they were not the worst bands they had come through.
So it's almost like they're delivering on the whole attitude of punk. You're getting it. It's almost like you're getting a genuine brand of punk with them.
Oh yeah, you're getting a dose. During an interview on the Today Show, the band grew surly and walked out mid-interview.
That's right. That's how I would act if I was to be interviewed on the Today Show.
In Atlanta, the audience threw plastic cups and popcorn at the band. While performing at a Notorious show in Dallas, Texas, Sid carved "Give Me a Fix" in his chest with a razor blade or a box cutter, while Johnny Rotten called the audience, quote, and forgive me, these are Johnny Rotten's words, he called the audience redneck cowboy faggots.
Oh, damn, Johnny.
Someone bloodied Sid's lip at the show. I mean, they're like getting into, after he calls these cowboys this name, like they start beating their asses. I mean, it's a fucking shit show. It's chaos. Johnny couldn't sing, Sid couldn't play, and by the time they reached Los Angeles, the tour was off and the band was over. Johnny Rotten quit. When they got to New York City, Sid was drunk and he had to be carried onto the plane, like drunk and high, and just was basically passed out.
So it's just devolved into a complete disaster.
Oh, it's not good. During this time, Nancy called home, gushing to her mother, quote, "Are you proud of me? I finally made it. I really made it." Which is sad because Nancy wasn't really doing anything. Nancy wasn't in the band. Nancy's pride was simply being the girlfriend of a guy in a band. Like, that was her biggest accomplishment.
Right.
And that's
sad, but it meant a lot to her. So I guess that's one way to view it.
I mean, I know. Back in London, Nancy had been arrested at a hotel before the tour and had to appear in court on drug charges. The charges were dismissed, but the press caught wind, and photos from the court appearance even made their way into U.S. papers, with Nancy appearing in a Philadelphia newspaper as like the hometown girl gone bad. Nancy had become somewhat of a minor celebrity by association, which was exactly what she wanted. For some reason, Sid and Nancy became the living embodiment of the punk scene. It wasn't the actual message of punk music, but rather this messy Romeo and Juliet clad in leather. Nancy's only ambition had been to land a famous musician boyfriend. Yet Nancy's boyfriend wasn't really a rock musician. I mean, he could barely play the bass guitar.
Right. He was more of a character.
Many saw Sid as being made famous by hype and fakery, but that he was not really like authentically talented. He was all image, no substance. One reporter interviewed Nancy in London asking if she was a groupie, and Nancy replied, "I'm not or never have been a groupie. If a groupie came up to Sid, he would kick her in the face." Nancy also went on in the article to say she wasn't cooking or cleaning. When asked about she was like, "I'm just not into that." She's like, "We're not really like dirty people, but I don't cook or clean."
Okay.
So their domestic life is not stereotypically normal, I guess.
Well, I feel like you got to cook and clean to survive, but maybe that's just me.
They just need heroin to survive.
Ah, yes, and love.
When asked about future plans, now that the band had broken up, Nancy said, quote, "I never think about the future."
And that is a true statement on her part.
But Nancy seemed happy for a period, maybe the only time in her life. Sid and Nancy had a life constructed around drugs, fueled by his fleeting fame and a little bit of money. The pair traveled to Paris, where they actually spent a month in Paris. Nancy was excited. She called her mother to report that Sid had bought her black French underwear
Ooh.
and some designer shoes. The month in Paris was like idyllic. But things would sour as soon as they returned to London. So this Paris trip seemed to be kind of like the time that she was most happy in her life. Nancy began having some health issues. She had an infection in her fallopian tubes and had to be like hospitalized for a period of time. So, of course, her mom's like freaking out because she's in London. She's in the hospital.
Oh, yeah.
She can't really help her daughter. She doesn't know how severe this issue is.
I think most parents, any parent would be beside themselves.
Then with the Sex Pistols breaking up, Sid was running out of money. Due to his lack of talent, they couldn't book solo shows for Sid. He had cut a single, My Way, which was kind of his own punk cover of Frank Sinatra's hit.
Okay.
McLaren had lost interest in Sid Vicious, moving on to another project. By now, talented artists had taken over the punk scene, like The Clash. But Sid and Nancy, especially Nancy, failed to see Sid's career as a flash in the pan. Nancy felt Sid was a rock star, and all he needed was a change of scenery and a new outlook. Nancy took over managing Sid's career. She truly felt he would make it as a solo artist. Nancy would stand by her man, even if his star was fading. Nancy decided the couple should return to New York City together, where Sid would reclaim his rock star halo. Sid and Nancy rented a room at the Hotel Chelsea in New York City. And by the time they arrived in New York, the couple looked like the Walking Dead. Nancy was extremely thin, as was Sid. Their first week at the Chelsea, Sid passed out in the lobby and had to be hospitalized. They thought he might have brain damage.
Jeez.
So let's talk about the Hotel Chelsea for a minute, Dylan. It's a 12-story hotel, originally a housing cooperative, home to many famous writers, artists, and musicians. Of course, now it's been gentrified and it's a luxury hotel accommodation.
Of course it is.
Bob Dylan, Arthur Miller, Patti Smith, Robert Mapplethorpe, Virgil Thomason, Dylan Thomas, Leonard Cohen, among many others, have resided at the Chelsea. Arthur C. Clarke wrote 2001: A Space Odyssey while staying there. Thomas Wolfe lived at the hotel before his death in 1938 and penned You Can't Go Home Again. William S. Burroughs wrote Naked Lunch while living there. And if you couldn't pay your rent, they would accept like art as a form of payment. So the lobby was full of all of these really cool pieces of art by famous folks.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, we could go on about the Chelsea, but we won't. Smack was a huge part of the 70s New York music scene. The New York Dolls, Johnny Thunders, the Heartbreakers, Richard Hell's groups, the Ramones, members of Blondie, all dabbled in heroin. And although Sid's career might have played a part in the couple's relocation to New York City, heroin was like a major factor because Nancy bragged that you could get heroin cheaper in New York than you could get it in London.
Right.
Nancy found the couple a methadone clinic, but Sid would be taunted by other addicts and get into fights when they would go. He looked freaky. People thought they looked freaky. I think they looked normal.
Well, they stood out in a crowd.
Nancy went to work on Sid's career. She tried calling record companies, but no one was interested in signing Sid. 2 weeks after arriving in the city, they were back on heroin and broke. Nancy phoned her parents asking for cash. Nancy did manage to get Sid some club work. She lined up a 3-night performance at Max's Kansas City in mid-September and booked him at the Hive in Philadelphia. And it's been said that he would make about $3,000 to $4,000 a night performing at Max's Kansas City. Sid's shows at Max's were sellouts, mostly due to his notoriety. But the shows were not very good, and people walked out disappointed. He got boos and heckles. It has been reported that Nancy began doing sex work again to pay for their drugs. Sid and Nancy seemed to fall deeper into despair and drug life. They rarely went out of their room at the Chelsea. One night, they nodded off in bed with a lit cigarette, which caused the mattress to catch fire. A hotel employee had to put the fire out. Sid and Nancy, unfazed, were found wandering around the hotel while their bed was burning. But they were moved to another room, room 100, which will actually be the scene of our conclusion today, Dylan. Okay. Sid and Nancy stayed in bed all day, watching cartoons, with the lights out, the shades drawn. The room was filled with takeout food containers, garbage, dirty laundry, empty cups. People would kind of come and go from all hours, like into the room.
God, I can smell this room.
Sid and Nancy mostly just laid around staring dazed at the TV because they're fucking high as hell. At one point, Nancy phoned home and told her mother that Sid had beaten her up. While in London, she claimed he had dangled her out of a hotel window. He had torn her ear and broken her nose. Nancy said Sid had started beating her again while they were in New York City. During this phone call, Nancy asked her mother if she could place a phone call to a place called White Deer Run, which was a rehab hospital. It seemed like Nancy wanted to get clean.
She was reaching out for help.
She was kind of at the end of her rope. And Deb didn't hear from Nancy again after that phone call. By early October, Nancy's schemes were all played out. Maxis stopped returning her frantic phone calls. She couldn't book him any more gigs. But back in England, Sid's version of My Way was climbing the charts, and the money was rolling in. $25,000 was paid to Sid, but he ended up getting about $18,750 after Malcolm McLaren got his cut.
Oh, I like
as
that.
Manager.
McLaren don't want anything to do with him anymore, but he sure is going to make money when he can off of him.
Well, he's got that contract.
Well, that's the way it works.
Suddenly, there was a silver lining. With that kind of cash hanging around, Sid and Nancy made all kinds of interesting friends, as you can imagine. Because if somebody's a drug addict and they're flashing a lot of cash, Dylan, you're going to end up with a lot of leeches and hangers-on, right?
Oh, yeah.
They would get personal deliveries from drug dealers, the same ones who'd laughed in their faces days before when they didn't have any money. Now these people were suddenly showing up at their room with an array of drugs.
That's the way it goes.
Nancy was known to keep their bank in a drawer inside the room. And again, this room is open at all hours. People in and out all the time.
So you got thousands of dollars just wadded up and put in this
Yeah, people said
drawer.
that they would go out and Nancy would carry the money and she would be dropping like $100 bills out of her pocket and her purse onto the floor, like picking them up and just very reckless, careless with this big wads of money. And that Sid would tell her, like, you shouldn't be flashing that cash while we're out.
Yeah.
Yeah. On October 12th of 1978, around 9:45 p.m., Sid and Nancy visited Kathy O'Rourke and Neon Leon Webster in his room, which was 119. Sid sat on Leon's bed, thumbing through a photo album, talking about how he had lost his looks. Nancy was pacing around, telling the group they needed to come up with some drugs, some good drugs. Sid was playing with a knife, and he made a statement about having no future. Around midnight, the couple left. Kathy went to her go-go dancing job in New Jersey, while Neon Leon went out to a punk club. Sid and Nancy decided to have a little get-together in room 100, where they called home at the Hotel Chelsea. Not many people showed up except for a few C-list rockers, some addicts, and, of course, people looking for a free drink. Just before 10 p.m., the couple was visited by a drug dealer known as Rocket's Red Glare. His real name is Michael Mora.
What the hell kind of nickname is that?
He is a B-movie actor and comedian who would later appear in the Animal House movie.
Okay.
It's like one of, I guess, his big claims to fame. But he was kind of known around town. Rocket sold the couple a mixture of drugs, including Dilaudid. Heroin at the time was in short supply in Manhattan. Nancy had been calling around trying to score some. The little that was making its way around town had been stepped on, which means diluted, to the point that it was no good. So heroin shortage, and then what was available was just shit. They didn't want it. Sid took 30 Tunils, which is a sleeping pill.
30?
30. With vodka, and quickly passed out. By all accounts, people who were coming in and out said that Sid was nearly comatose. He was just completely out of it. By midnight, nearly all of the party guests had gone home. Around 2:20 a.m., Nancy calls Rockets again, asking for more drugs. She also asked for some new hypodermics. Around 3 a.m., Neon Leon and a man named Skip Wayne claimed to see Sid and Nancy in the hotel lobby, though they have made some contradictory statements. And that's the thing. This timeline that I've pieced together is like contradictory. Like some people say he's been passed out. Other people are seeing him walking around.
Right. And this is, well, one problem with eyewitness statements is you have inconsistencies.
Well, and
these
these are all people who are
they're
using
all getting
drugs
high
and partying,
too. They're all drinking.
Yes.
Yes. So, I mean, the perspectives and what they remember or don't remember, who knows what the truth is.
Around 3:05 a.m., Lisa Garcia, who lived in room 103 next door to the couple, heard 3 loud knocks at the door. A male voice called, "Let me in, I'm not playing." Lisa didn't answer the door because she was scared of the person on the other side. They were knocking on her door.
She didn't know who it was,
No.
and she's like, screw that.
Soon after, she fell asleep. Around 3:15 a.m., Rocket's Red Glare arrived at the Chelsea, claiming he was unable to find any of the things Nancy needed. Between 3:30 and 4:45, he claims the phone rang multiple times while he was there hanging out. Rocket said Sid would go from being completely passed out to getting up and checking the door and hallway. He said, quote, Tunils, whatever this drug is.
I don't know what that is.
Tunol, I don't know what it is. Somebody knows. We'll call it Tunils. They are funny that way. One minute you're completely out of it, and the next minute you're a little ambulatory. No, I'm not buying that. You don't take a fucking sleeping pill and pass the fuck out where people are saying you're comatose, and then in 5 minutes you get up and you're walking around, and then you go pass back out. That don't make sense to me.
It doesn't me either, but who knows?
Well, there's a reason why I think this guy's full of shit.
Oh, okay.
We're going to get to that. Nancy offers Rockets $800 to find her some more Dilaudid. This is what he says. He left and returned around 5 a.m. While he was in the Chelsea hotel lobby, he saw someone named Stephen C., who was Nancy and Sid's regular Quaalude and Tunol dealer. He said he saw this guy get onto the elevator while Rockets is making a phone call in the lobby. I'm sorry, I have to skip it. My document. Neon Leon claims at 4 a.m. Nancy had called him as he returned to his room with a go-go dancer named Kelly. Nancy said Sid was crashing out, they were high on Tunol, and asked if Leon had any pot. Around 4:15, Leon said he heard 4 to 5 loud knocks at the door and noises outside in the hallway, like something had been dropped, and that it was like a tinny sound. And he said maybe it was a knife. I don't know. He ignored the knocks. Around 5 a.m., resident who was staying in room 228 called to report someone was banging loudly on their door. A bellhop found Sid Vicious roaming the hallways at this time. The bellhop said Vicious began attacking him, and he had to wrestle Sid Vicious to the ground. And basically got into a fight with Sid Vicious.
Oh my gosh.
Vicious is bleeding and walks off. Another resident reported that Sid stumbled into her room around 5:30 a.m., bleeding from the fight with the bellhop. So is he passed out? Is he fighting? I don't know what's happening.
It doesn't sound like he's
Again,
passed
it's like
out.
these conflicting stories.
Right.
Around 7:30 a.m., Vera Mendelssohn, who lived in room 102, arrived home and heard a series of moans coming from the room next door. It was a woman's voice, and it sounded as if she was alone. This frightened Vera. She said the woman wasn't calling anyone's name. She was just kind of moaning And she assumed if someone was in the room with her, that this person would have been calling someone's name for help. Right. So Vera assumed this woman was alone. She said the noises finally stopped and she went to sleep. The following morning, around 10 a.m., an anonymous caller phoned the Hotel Chelsea's front desk to say someone in room 100 was seriously injured and needed assistance. When the hotel staff arrived, they found the room empty, but Nancy's body was found under the sink in the bathroom of their room. She had suffered a stab wound to the abdomen. Nancy was wearing only a pair of black underwear. She was dead.
My gosh.
Sid arrived shortly after, just before police made their way to the hotel. Sid was still out of it from the previous drugs he had taken, this Tuniol or whatever it's called, but he had managed to walk to the methadone clinic that morning to get his methadone. Sid had awakened from sleep around 8 a.m. He said the bed was soaked with blood and that he followed the trail of blood into the bathroom where Nancy was dead. Sid Vicious was arrested on charges of first-degree murder. The 21-year-old was looking at 7 years to life in New York's Rikers Island prison. Sid genuinely did not know if he was guilty or not. He didn't know if he killed his girlfriend or not.
Maybe you shouldn't take 30 pills, bud. I'm damn. That's a lot. That's got to be a lot of pills of any kind.
Sid confessed that he must have killed Nancy, but later recanted. Witnesses who were in the couple's room have stated vehemently there was no way Sid could have killed Nancy due to his drug state. A 5-inch hunting knife, the alleged murder weapon, was found lying on top of a trunk near the room's door. And I've seen conflicting reports that it did have fingerprints, but other reports say it had been wiped clean.
So, but you have multiple, I would say, good witnesses that say Sid was up and about. Whether or not he was fully had all his faculties or not could be argued, but he certainly was up and moving around. The bellhop, the girl's room he wandered into.
No money was found in the room, despite guests having seen Nancy with around $1,400 to $1,800 cash during the party.
So there's no money on her or on him, and
Sid has $9 on him.
There's not a big wad of money in the drawer.
The big money is gone.
Wow.
By 1 p.m., forensics arrived at the hotel. The Jaguar K11 folding knife with a 5-inch blade was recovered. 3 needles, a bottle of Tuniol pills, and some brown flaky powder was also found in the room, kind of saturated among this big blood stain.
Okay.
Yeah. There were 3 trunks in the room, but most of the couple's possessions were stored in plastic shopping bags. During autopsy, it was discovered the knife wound was only about 1 inch deep. Nancy had 2 bruises on her face, one of which supposedly came from, a couple days before when Sid had smashed Nancy in the face with a guitar, according to their friends. Nancy had some track marks on her arm, and it was determined that she had been stabbed likely between 6 and 7 a.m. and that she had died between 8 to 10 a.m. Sid was taken to Rikers Island and held on $25,000 bail. Over the next few days, Sid Vicious received more press coverage than he had ever known while a member of the Sex Pistols. It turned out the drug cocktail Sid had taken on the night in question was more than enough to kill him. Yet somehow Sid's drug tolerance was so high, he had somehow survived those 30 Tuniols.
My gosh.
McLaren and Ann Beverly were in the city within 48 hours trying to raise money for his bail. His mother sold her story to the New York Post to get money. By mid-November, Sid was back in Manhattan making the rounds at places like Max's Kansas City, where he called himself a dirty dog and said, quote, "I still miss Nancy so much. I dream I'm with her in bed and I wake up all hot and she's not there. She was everything to me."
So sad.
Soon enough, Sid found a replacement girlfriend in Michelle Robinson, who, like Nancy, was a go-go dancer and sex worker. Because junkies never learn, Sid was back on heroin with a quickness. Sid spoke of booking gigs and at times discussed suicide. He talked about joining Nancy. Vivian Westwood, McLaren's girlfriend, decided she could cash in on this, so she printed shirts with Sid's picture and the words, "She's dead, I'm alive, I'm yours, and began selling those.
What the hell? It's funny. There's always people around the edges of these types of situations trying to cash in.
I should also mention that, after Nancy's found, on October 23rd, Sid attempted suicide at the Hotel Seville, where he was staying with his mother and Beverly. He went into the bathroom and cut his arms and wrists with a razor, as well as a crushed light bulb. He told his mother, Malcolm McLaren, and Joe Stevens that he'd made a pact with Nancy and needed some lewds to finish it.
Wow.
He was taken to a hospital for treatment. Sorry. I'm getting all choked up here. I've got the colds, Dylan. Sid signed in every day at the New York Police Department while he's awaiting trial. He attended a Blondie show with Richard Hell, Jerry Nolan, and Johnny Thunders. And in that night, in a fit of rage, Sid smashed Patti Smith's brother Todd in the face with a bottle at a nightclub. He was he was on parole, so that was revoked, and he was sent back to jail at Rikers.
Wow.
Which I can imagine is probably not a good place for some skinny, dirty, nasty little heroin guy like Sid.
No, it's certainly one of the
I'm sure they probably beat his ass.
more notorious prisons here in America.
Malcolm McLaren hired F. Lee Bailey to represent Sid. His trial was set to start February 1st of 1979. And if you remember, F. Lee Bailey, Albert DeSalvo, the Boston Strangler.
Dude, all kinds.
O.J. Simpson.
O.J. Simpson.
Sam Shepard.
Patty Hearst.
A lot of famous cases.
Yes.
McLaren decided he needed to raise money for Sid's cause, and he schemed to fly ex-Sex Pistols, Jones and Cook to New York City to begin recording a secret album on February 3rd. So they would be the backup band for Sid. He was going to do a secret album with Sid to raise money. Richard Branson from Virgin Records decided to put up the bail money to get Sid back out of jail.
Okay.
Meanwhile, on January 31st at CBGB's bar in the Bowery, drug dealer Rocket's Red Glare
What a stupid nickname, bro. I'm sorry. It's really dumb.
he casually admitted to several bar drinkers that he had murdered Nancy Spungen and robbed her. According to witnesses, he produced a few blood-stained dollars to prove it, yet no one went to police.
Yeah, see, there's something weird going on here because all the money's gone. So somebody took the money, and if Sid is found in this almost, I guess you would call it almost a fugue state, he doesn't know exactly what's going on. There's no money on him, no money found hidden away anywhere in the room, and this is a very strange situation.
So F. Lee Bailey, on February 1st of 1979, when this trial is supposed to begin, he makes a few statements that are quite interesting, Dylan. So let's talk about that. He says that the hotel room was covered in at least a dozen different fingerprints. The police's case against Vicious was full of holes. It was possible that Sid Vicious was completely innocent and had not murdered Nancy. Even if he was there at the time, there was a solid chance Vicious could walk. In less than a day and a half, F. Lee Bailey had gone through witness statements, cross-examined 2 New York City detectives, and had made a strong plea bargain. There was some circumstantial evidence against Vicious, but he said that was undercut by Sid's affection for Nancy, the lack of witnesses, and the number of fingerprints in the room. So by late afternoon, Sid Vicious is free again.
Okay.
Back out on the street. Sid, along with Anne, his mother, Michelle Robinson, his new girlfriend, photographer Eileen Polk, Heartbreaker Jerry Nolan, Elliot Kidd, and Peter Kodak Gravel, who was a photographer, headed for 63 Bank Street to have a celebratory dinner. Booze flowed, and so did heroin. And Beverly had gotten heroin for Sid. Peter Kodak, who would later see a photograph of Rocket's Red Glare, he would confirm that that was the guy who had brought the heroin for Sid.
Oh, on the celebratory night.
Yes.
Okay.
They got heroin for Sid. Peter was kind of responsible for getting it, and that this guy Rocket's Red Glare is the one who delivers the heroin. So let's talk about this, Dylan.
Oh, you're delivering some hot stuff.
At the Bank Street party, Sid seemed to be in a lighter mood. There was talk of his solo album and how he had a good chance of beating this murder rap. Around 10 p.m., Sid used some of the heroin. A good dose, recalled his mother. She said he was glowing. Feeling the heroin might be too good, Anne Beverly hid the smack in her purse. Sid died that night from a heroin overdose. It is said the heroin was 98% pure, incredibly strong for a city that was having a drug drought. 22% at the time was considered like good heroin.
Wow.
No one knows for sure if the first hit caused Sid's overdose or if he found the stash in his mother's purse and used more. Suspicion once again pointed to Rocket's red glare, though no one seemed to care that another junkie had died.
Well, there you go.
But isn't that strange?
It is strange
Like
that
this guy who
all of a
delivers
sudden,
this heroin,
yeah.
it's very good stuff, and that's what kills Sid Vicious.
Well, it's straight off the brick. It's not been stepped on at all, which would be odd anytime. Anytime you found a drug. What they do is they use that, obviously, for the people who don't know, is to stretch out the profit. They want to cut in a filler, basically, and also a lot of times they'll do that because it's so much more dangerous in its pure state. And so yeah, then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, when there's hardly any heroin around, what is around has been stepped on and is hardly pure, no purity at all. And then all of a sudden, here comes this guy who was there in and out of there all night that night that Nancy was killed. And so he shows up and gives them basically pure heroin.
After he's been at a bar.
After he's allegedly
been telling people he killed her,
right.
He robbed her, and
right.
Here's the money, and it has blood on it.
Right. That's very, very odd. Very odd.
On February 7th of 1979, Sid Vicious was cremated in New York. Sid's new song, Something Else, had entered the UK charts at number 3.
Wow.
Now let's talk a bit about Nancy again. Nancy's funeral was held on October 15th of 1978. She was buried at the King David Memorial Park in Bensalem, Pennsylvania. At her funeral, a poem was written by her cousin, Dan Becker, and read aloud. It said, "Don't misunderstand me. What I do has purpose, a meaning you may not see. I know what I'm doing. Please don't judge me from where you stand. My life is my own. My decisions are in my hands. Don't try to make your dreams a part of mine, for I have my own."
Wow.
Before his death, Sid sent a letter to the Spungens. In the letter, he wrote, "Nancy was a very special person, too beautiful for this world. I feel so privileged to have loved her and been loved by her." Nancy's mom wrote that she was actually incredibly relieved as they rode home from the funeral. Nancy was finally safe and protected. Deborah has documented her story in the book, And I Don't Want to Live This Life, a mother's story of her daughter's murder, which was a big resource for today's episode. I also watched the documentary Who Killed Nancy by Alan G. Parker, which features interviews with friends and people who were in room 100 the night of the murder.
Wow.
You saw some of that.
Yeah.
I also read Pretty Vacant, A History of Punk in the UK by Phil Strongman. And then I read a lot of newspaper articles from the time. In the essay Love, Morphine, and Memory by Gene Gregortis, Rocket's Red Glare, a.k.a. Michael Mora, talks about the murder, and he said, quote, "Let me tell you for a fact, Sid did not kill Nancy." He also claims that Nancy was killed by a drug dealer who worked at Max's Kansas City, but does not reveal his name. Rockets also went on in the essay to say he couldn't stand Nancy and then described her murder as a snuff film. He says he has reason to believe that her death was filmed, as well as the Son of Sam murders. Rocket's conspiracy theory claims there was a space in the Lucky Chang's location, I guess it was Lucky Chang's at the time, in the basement where people paid big money in the 70s to see live murder shows. Many of these live shows started as an S&M show, but ended in murder, because the people paying to see the killings wanted an element of surprise, where the victim didn't know it was coming.
Oh my gosh.
He also claims to have seen a German recreation of Nancy's murder using kids who were dressed up to look like Sid and Nancy. He said it was an inside joke among those in this community of like snuff film purveyors.
Jesus. Of course, who can believe a word this guy says?
Some suggested that Nancy killed herself. Nancy, who always seemed to have a death wish, is thought by many who knew her to have plunged the knife into her own stomach. If anything, Sid Vicious is a perfect scapegoat. He was influencing young people negatively, according to the press. He was a heroin user, an advocate of stupid violence. He embodied anti-glamour. Before hip-hop, punk music was where street culture and crime culture met. The guys, including Sid Vicious, would make $2 million on a record, then go cut each other with box cutters in a fight. Right? The establishment took punk rock seriously, and they needed to squash it immediately before it caught on and kids started paying attention and rebelling.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Vicious brought to the forefront a whole new mindset among youth. Some people say he was a rock star. You can argue that. But he is a rock music performer. He is in his first relationship with his first love. And then the next thing you know, he's in jail for murder.
There you go.
So it's just soap opera-y and tabloid fodder. I mean, it's very sensational. No one will ever know what happened that night. Deborah Spungen believes that Nancy orchestrated her own death. She had wanted to die for many years. Whether Sid plunged the knife into Nancy or not, we will never know.
Damn.
But I should also say that 5-inch hunting knife, Nancy had bought a few days before her death.
Okay. What a story.
I know it was long.
What a wild and crazy story.
And I know we did a really deep dive into Nancy's life, but I just felt like we had to talk about all that.
Well, no.
Before we could talk about the murder.
Well, I agree. If you just, glossed over her childhood and stuff, and you just been like, well, I don't get why does this woman act like this? Why she acts so out of control? You wouldn't have a clear picture of that. So I think by you starting from day one with little Miss Nancy, it really give you a clear picture of Sid don't know what hit him when Nancy came into his life. Honestly, she was the big personality, and she just absorbed him in a way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome, Dylan.
Thank you for that. And thanks to our new patrons.
I know that was long, and I know I probably sound terrible, my voice and all, but thank you for sticking it out with us.
Yes.
While we recover.
Yes. Thank you for listening to all the words. And we appreciate all our listeners.
Trying over here.
And we're going to get fully back into proper podcast shape. And we'll be churning out a bit late of a midweek, but it's coming. It's coming for you.
We should have it by tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And again, this was late. We apologize, but we hope you enjoy it. Heather worked very, very hard on this episode, and I'm sure you can tell, as usual. And, you got anything else to say, Miss Heather?
I did a lot of reading for this.
I'm going to put her to bed for now.
I did a lot of reading, Dylan.
She done wore herself out.
Well, thanks for tuning in. If you have any feedback, want to comment on this case, or have a case suggestion, you can always email us, mountainmurderspodcast@gmail.com. We do try to respond to the emails that come our way.
Yes.
Thanks again for listening to the episode. And like Dylan said, we'll be back with midweek.
Yes, and we can't wait. There's so much stuff to talk about in true crime
There's
news.
a lot going on right now, so I can't wait to discuss with you, Dylan.
All righty. We'll see you next time.
I'll also post, sorry for interrupting you, Dylan. I'm also going to post photos of Sid and Nancy on our Instagram. So make sure you go check that out if you want to see some of their wild antics.
Okay.
And Nancy's keen fashion sense.
There you go.
Okay, bye.
Bye.